Good meeting starts on time and ends on time. Well, hi everybody, and welcome to the Eureka City Council meeting on this lovely February 7th. We're going to open this meeting with a land acknowledgement. It's the first meeting in February. The land that Eureka rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Jirojiji. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The city of Eureka acknowledged the Wiyot community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates the city's commitment to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Okay, and if we'd please join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. And is there a report out of closed session, Attorney Black?
Mayor, no final actions were taken in closed session, therefore no report.
Okay, so next we have mayor's announcements. Let's see. Oh, roll call. Yes, let's do a roll call, shall we?
Councilmember Castellano.
Here.
Councilmember Moulton.
Here.
Councilmember Fernandez. Present. Councilmember Bauer.
Here.
Councilmember Contreras de Loche.
Here.
Mayor Burgell.
Here. Okay, thank you. So now we're going to move on to mayor's announcements. Tonight we are honoring a student, Sadra Joseph. She's not here tonight, but she won an award for every student succeeding at Eureka High, and she'll be moving forward to the next round. So it's really exciting. Really want to honor the success of our local youth and the people in our community. So we'll be passing on her certificate at a later date. And now if we could have Dave Silverbrand's proclamation. Councilmember Moulton.
Thank you, Mayor. It would be my honor. The City of Eureka proclamation in recognition of Dave Silverbrand, February 7th, 2023. Whereas the City of Eureka wishes to acknowledge the dedicated service and commitment of Dave Silverbrand to the journalism community and the City of Eureka, and whereas Dave Silverbrand was born August 13th, 1946 in King City, California, and relocated to Humboldt County in the early 1990s, and whereas Dave loved meeting people from all walks of life, he knew how to bring joy through his creative storytelling. And whereas Dave Silverbrand contributed to the field of journalism as a television reporter in Maine for 20 years, as a teacher of journalism at College of the Redwoods for over 30 years, was a reporter locally for a number of news operations, most recently with North Coast News. And whereas Dave Silverbrand was a legendary journalist, whether conducting a one-on-one interview with then Vice President George H.W. Bush or authoring several books, Dave knew how to bring joy through his creative storytelling. And whereas Dave Silverbrand was an active member in many community events, including service on the Transportation Safety Commission for the City of Eureka, and whereas the City of Eureka is a better place due to the contributions of Dave Silverbrand and his commitment to professional journalism and kindness. Now, therefore, I, Katie Moulton, on behalf of Mayor Kim Burgell and the Eureka City Council, in recognition of Dave Silverbrand's many contributions to our city and its citizens, do hereby express our deep appreciation for his dedication to the City of Eureka and extend to his family our sincere condolences upon his passing.
Thank you. And could we bring forward the Cossacks to receive this proclamation?
I'd like to thank the city for recognizing Dave. He's
very good friend of ours for about 30 years. My wife was a very good friend of his confidant. And Dave taught us a lot of different things.
Oh, your mic isn't on.
I can hear myself fine.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Stephen.
I'm John Kosak. So I'd like to thank the city for honoring Dave, recognizing Dave, a very good friend of ours. My wife Joni and I, she was very, very, very close friend of Dave's for many, many years, 30 or more years. His confidant, his friend, his advisor, his therapist, you name it. So just on a personal note, Dave taught me, one of the things that he taught me really was the enthusiasm that he put into everyday life. And he would go out and talk to people of all walks of life anywhere he went. He went to Israel, he went to the Dominican Republic, he went all over the place. And I always admired that in him because I'm a little bit reticent to do some of these things. And I thought, if Dave can do it, I can do it. So maybe I'll take that memory of him and use it and make it, make good use out of it as well. So thank you again for recognizing what he meant to this community and what it meant to us as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. One of a kind, that Dave Silverbrand. So I also wanted to report on some travel. So I just recently went to the conference for the new mayors and new council members. And it was very interesting and I learned a lot. Just a couple things that I wanted to report back about. The state does have a list of priorities now. Several of these have to do with like protecting and expanding investments to prevent and reduce homelessness, to continue to work with our local businesses and the supply and affordability of housing, and then safeguarded residential or essential local revenues and support fiscal sustainability. So those were some of those. There's a budget request for housing and homeless, $3 billion this year. The thing that I thought was really great was that there was a lot that was really great, but the state is looking to set aside $100 million to address the fentanyl crisis. And what that will look like is through naloxone education, prevention, those types of things. And something else that was interesting was that the prisons, they're closing a lot and there'll be $150 million in savings. Other than that, I just learned a lot about how this job works, and I really am grateful that I got to go. So now we will move on to presentations. We don't have any public comment. This is the time for members of the public who wish to be heard on matters that do not appear on the agenda. City Council policy is to limit each speaker to 3 minutes. Such time allotment or portion thereof shall not be transferred to other speakers. The public will be allowed to speak concurrently with the calling of an agenda item following the staff presentation of that item. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the City Council may not take action on any item that does not appear on the agenda. Is there anyone here for public comment? Welcome, Mr. Parr.
But at any rate, so the last time I was here, I pretty much excoriated y'all for our, millions of dollars spent on helping the homeless and the mentally ill. Excuse me?
Can you turn the mic on?
Green light's on.
No.
Oh, this one. Oh, middle bottom. Yeah, this one's not on. Oh, okay. At any rate, And I told the story about my friend who was on my couch trying to receive help and everything. And I'm here to publicly thank our mayor. A couple days after I got a hold of her, we had housing for my friend, albeit $1,000 a month taxpayer subsidized housing. But I appreciate the fact that she's been helped. But the fact of the matter is that for everything that we put into it, it shouldn't have taken all that to get that help. And I don't think that the taxpayers need to be on the hook for $1,000. Actually, it's more than $1,000 a month because the property developer owner is getting $1,000 a month, but that doesn't cover the amount that's being spent on the whole bureaucracy that's supporting that. So we're probably spending $2,000, $2,500, who knows, per month to help one homeless person. That's not good use of funds. Mayor Burgel and I had a meeting last week. We discussed methods to maybe cut those costs down. She's going to look into some of the things we talked about. I'm looking into some of the things we talked about, but I know we can do better. As I told her, a couple days after my one friend got housed, another person showed up on my porch who's in a wheelchair and homeless, living in a van with no tags, no insurance, fixing to be towed anytime. She could use housing, and there's nothing to help her other than months-long and years-long waiting lists. For the money that we've spent, we can do better than sweetheart deals with private developers to rent rooms for $1,000 a month. I know we can. You all know we can. And we need to work on it. And, one of the things we talked about, I have 30 seconds left. One of the things that came up was the lack of land for things like tiny home villages and whatnot. And then I see that we're spending $250,000 to buy some wetlands to build a trail through. So what's the priority in our community? Is the priority getting these people off the streets and helping the downtrodden and the down and out? Or is it building a fancy trail through a swamp? Think about it.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good evening, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Deborah Thomas, and I'm a resident of Humboldt County. I first would like to thank everybody, including all the wonderful organizations that have worked so hard on homelessness in Humboldt County over the years. I appreciate the few shelter organizations that we do have in place. It's going to take all of us working together in our community to go forward to advance and put things in place to help keep our citizens alive that live on our streets in Humboldt County. We need to discuss and understand the barriers that people face trying to get into one of our 3 shelters here in Eureka, California. The only shelter bed my sweet friend Justine Green may have had access to is the Women's Eureka Rescue Mission that has barriers like no drug or alcohol policy, you must have an ID, no partners, no pets, very slim possessions. On January 4th, 5th, 2023, the North Coast experienced tornado winds and torrential downpour. One of the biggest storms of the North Coast that I can remember. Justine Green had no other choice that night but to jump into the recycle bin to try to seek refuge from the storm. She was very familiar with the mission, and she knew she could not meet the barrier because that night she broke her sobriety. Having to get into the recycle bin cost her her precious life. This horrific accident has affected so many people, her family and friends, including the garbage man that accidentally crushed and killed her. My thoughts go out to him and his family. This can give us a time to pause. We need to find solutions for people that sleep legally in this city. The courts have deemed sleep deprivation as torture. Many people like Justine Green have died and will continue to die in this city until we address our shelter needs, the barriers that keep people out on our streets. They need alternatives to stay alive. We have roughly 160 shelter beds and 1,600 homeless people in Humboldt County. So on any given night, we have over 1,000 of our citizens sleeping on our streets. I would ask that you put homelessness, shelter barriers, and some kind of alternatives on the agenda so we can start to have a conversation on how we can save lives and never have to experience another loss like Justine's. We could learn we together can learn that the statement on every EPD release that says that shelter space is available is not factual, because if it were, Justine Green would still be with us today. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Deb. And to let you know, Deb, we are having a special meeting talking about encampments coming up February 28th. So please come.
Okay.
We'd love
Thank
to
you
have
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi again, everyone. Tiffany LaFoon. So I don't have a whole lot to add to that great statement that Deborah just made. I did want to expand on something that Stephen mentioned, which is that law enforcement officers have been the past week or two very aggressively going after people who are parked, especially under the Samoa Bridge, but all around the waterfront, and taking their vehicles for not having current registration. And the people who are living in their vehicles, for the most part, are people who cannot survive outdoors. They're people with severe physical disabilities and health issues. And to take away the little bit of shelter that they can possibly access is putting people in really dangerous situations. And so I hope we can find a way to help people with that issue, because ultimately it will be much cheaper for us to provide support for getting their registration and whatever current than to take their shelter and then try to shelter them other ways. So just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here for public comment? Is there anyone on Zoom? Oh, we do have someone. Hello.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, City Council members, and good evening, City staff. My name is Joey Shields. I'm a project manager with Link Housing. As I'm sure many of you know, Link Housing was selected back in October 2020 to develop 3 of the city-owned parking lots as part of Housing Implementation Plan H34. I'm here tonight because tomorrow the City of Eureka and Link Housing are partnering on a community event that we are going to be holding. This event will be part of our larger Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, otherwise known as ASIC. The City of Eureka and Link Housing are going to partner and submit an application to the state. This portion of the funding request, which would total approximately $30 million, about 16 to 17 million will be for affordable housing, and we can leverage that for tax credits to support the development of our project. And the balance of that, approximately 13 to 14 million, would be for a variety of public transportation programs, infrastructure projects, as well as partnerships with community-based organizations such as the Westside Community Improvement Association, the Bicycle Kitchen, RCAA, as well as the City of Eureka's Uplift and CAPE programs. So I'm here just to kind of get the word out about this event. I'm really excited to be here in Eureka with all of you. It's been a long time coming from my perspective, and again, very grateful for all of you and the city's continued partnership on this project. I'll be here. I have quite a few flyers with me tonight, so more than happy to stick around if the mayor or any of the council members would like to chat. I can also give business cards and we can have follow-up conversations afterwards. But once again, just wanted to express my true gratitude for all of you for everything you've done to help move this project forward and our continued partnership. So thank you all and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you see anybody online? I see Althea.
Althea? There. Are you there, Althea? Yeah, it looks like she's trying to talk. Yeah, the sound should be. Let me try. Nezzy? Is it? They can hear Althea.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, go ahead and start over.
Okay. So I'm very glad to hear that Stephen's friend got housing. I agree that, $1,000 a month is a lot. I agree that, having it go to a private developer instead of being a nonprofit or a public agency is not ideal. But, the best way to reduce the cost of housing is to build more of it. On to other, recent topics that have come up. Most of you who have met me know that I am not very big. I walk a lot. I walk downtown. I walk in Old Town quite a bit. As a small woman, I don't feel unsafe because of most of the other people in Old Town and downtown. I feel unsafe because of the traffic. That is the biggest risk to my life on a daily basis. Are there people that, could be threatening or could be, frightening? Yes, there are. The best way to tackle that problem is to have a neighborhood watch. But in order to have a neighborhood watch, you need to have neighbors who are there after 5 p.m., after business hours. And so that's why I wanted to, express my support again for housing in downtown and Old Town, a couple of stories tall, gives people a better vantage point out their windows to be able to call 911. As far as, needing to preserve parking lots, I see more homeless people congregating in parking lots. They don't congregate in occupied apartment buildings. They congregate in empty lots. The Lloyd building parking lot is mostly empty most of the time. That's where people set up their tents. That's where people sit all day. And if business owners around the Lloyd are concerned about losing parking, the former JCPenney building at 5th and D has been vacant for quite a while. That could easily be turned into parking or a parking garage. And that's all I got for now. Oh, Joey Shields, those of us who are online would like to know about this community event. I will send you an email.
Thanks, Althea.
Nezzy?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you also for anticipating the upcoming meeting you mentioned on the February 28th. That's really very important. I also want to comment with Deborah and Tiffany and Stephen about the needs we have to have alternatives. And for all of the reasons mentioned, it's essential, but a variety of alternatives. And we think about building housing and getting people in housing, and that's really an important thing to do. But we aren't keeping up with the needs and the numbers of people that are outside and need the support of places to be, shelter beds, or opportunities where they can be in their vehicles safely and securely. And we know that there are lots of examples where that can happen successfully. I'm really happy to hear that you're maybe entertaining the idea of doing some of these things. And I'm in concert with everyone else about the tragedy with Justine and so many others that we see and know weekly. Just in the last week, numbers, that's not just a person or two people, it's numbers of people that we continue to lose on the street. And I am so happy that we're embracing this and having the dialogue where we can actually work together and create some alternatives that will make it possible for more people to have security and in the anticipation of having housing at such time as it's available. But we can't let the streets be the waiting room for housing. We have to have some alternatives. So thank you for that coming up and for the intent to do better.
Thank you, Nezzy. Do you see anyone else? No. Okay. Well, seeing no one, we'll take it back from public comment and move on to the consent calendar. So are there any items? I believe F4 will be pulled. Is there any other items that anyone? No?
I had asked for F5 to be pulled, Mayor.
Great. So, okay, so can we get a motion for the balance of the consent calendar?
I'll move to approve the consent calendar,
Less F4 and F5.
minus F4 and F5.
Thank you.
A second.
Okay, please vote.
Unanimous vote, motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, F4, the high tank booster pump station reconstruction project award. Director Gerving?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The item before you tonight is the reconstruction of the high tank booster pump station. The current station, which is there at Harrison K, Harrison L area, was constructed in the late 1950s, making it about 65 years old at this point. The pumps and the motors are original. They're still chugging along, but they definitely are in need of update. The high tank itself was replaced in 2005, but the booster pump station was left in place at that time. The city is relatively lucky in that we have a pretty simple water system. We have two main pressure zones and another pressure zone for Lunbar Hills. And this pump station is a critical component of one of those two pressure zones, the high zone. It provides water to most residential properties in conjunction with pumps at the water treatment plant, providing some redundancy, which is important for reliability of the system. The project's been programmed in the CIP for some time and moved forward toward construction in 2021. It was budgeted in early 2022 in conjunction with the city's consultant, GHD. It's an atypical project for the city. It's not our standard linear underground, but it's not unusual, and it's not unusual for our consultants to help cost estimate things like this. Still, even with that analysis that was done by both the city and its consultants, we've encountered some unexpected costs. The things that came in higher included the design, the pump costs, which are a big portion of the project. They were anticipated about $180,000. They came in over twice that amount. And, you know, it comes down to those same supply chain issues we've heard about. Not only are they more expensive, they're also extremely long lead items. We ordered them last March and they haven't arrived yet. So all these are complicating factors. And then finally, the construction costs themselves also came in higher. The project was bid earlier on in 2022, and the low bid at that point was $909,000. City staff, in partnership with our design team, revised the project scope, removing a bunch of asphalt paving, which also took out some requirements for other low-impact development features. And then we changed the design of the wet well, where the pumps are actually located and where they're pumping water from, to make it easier to build. That should have lowered costs by more than $100,000, but instead it only reduced the bid by $20,000, just pointing to how costs have continued to increase in the months that transpired between the two bids. Overall, including the recommended contingency for the construction project, staff is requesting an additional appropriation of $500,000 from water reserves. We understand the limits of the enterprise fund. The rates have to pay for the expenditures, and we endeavor to keep our annual costs within those estimates. As a result, staff is going to delay a planned project that's estimated at $1 million for recoating of the low tank and push that off into a subsequent fiscal year. So with that, if council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions? Councilmember Fernandez?
Right. So I know in some conversations that we've had that there was some value engineering going in there. We conducted some work in-house. And so how is it determined? When do we come to that notion that we can reduce the cost by potentially doing the work ourselves? And why was that potentially not done at the start when we went out for the first bid?
Yeah, in this case, the elements that were removed from the project scope were intended to reduce the cost directly by removing certain unit costs like paving, for instance. That would be a nice to have. We currently have gravel roads through that facility. Having asphalt would be more serviceable in the long run. However, it's not critical to the operation of the facility, so it was removed. By removing that, it also reduced or removed the requirement to treat runoff from that asphalt, so it reduced a landscaping line item. The second thing that we did was try to make the structure itself easier to build, thereby reducing the cost because of the decreased complexity. In this case, there really isn't the ability for city staff to do any part of the work. Nothing jumps to mind anyway. We do sometimes look at individual smaller projects and can we make those happen more easily, more cost effectively with our crews. And we do that where it's feasible. But this project is just beyond the scope of something that we can perform in-house. And there aren't chunks of it that make sense to do with city staff.
Okay. And I understand, like you yourself, you don't control inflation, let alone supply chain issues. So I commend you for putting this report together and getting back to us on that. But one of the elements that you hit on is that while there are supply chain issues, how is it that the design came back higher than previous?
That was honestly a little bit frustrating for us too. Mm-hmm. It was just a factor of things getting more complicated along the way, about having to revise that design and go back to the design team to help finish it up. Removing elements from the scope increases the cost of the design because you've already completed one set of design documents and you have to revise them, and it comes at an increased cost. And then redesigning the structure itself to make that wet well easier to build also required additional time from the design team, resulting in increased cost.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, Councilmember Moulton.
I just had a question whether or not this would affect the high tank and low tank structures themselves.
No, it won't. What the high tank booster pump station does is it has a set of pumps in it that pressurize the high zone and pump water into the high tank. And the high tank, it provides pressure to the system and acts as a buffer so that the pumps aren't having to run constantly. The new pumps that we will be installing will allow us to better modulate the water level in the tank and do so more in a more energy efficient manner. But it won't affect the structural integrity of either the high tank or the low tank, and there aren't any concerns about the structural integrity of those as they sit right now. We maintain them regularly. Like I mentioned, the upcoming tank recoating project for the low tank, we're pushing that off, but we're not concerned about any negative impacts of delaying that project for one fiscal year.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, the concern that was brought to my attention was about the Loggers logo. So as long as that's okay, I think
we're in good shape on the Loggers logo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go Loggers. Okay. Seeing no other questions, we'll bring it forward to public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to comment on this item? Online? No. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council for a motion and a vote.
I'll move to approve item F4, the high tank booster pump station reconstruction.
Okay, all in favor?
Unanimous yes vote, motion carries.
Great, thank you. Moving on to F5, 1429 Sunny Avenue property acquisition. City Manager Slattery.
Thank you, Mayor Brigel, and good evening, Council and Mayor. So this item here was something that came up to staff. There was a property that's located on Sunny Avenue, which is off of Myrtle, kind of by the domes, as people call them, kind of by by McFarland and Myrtle. Anyway, the property came up. It was a foreclosure. We have an alignment for the Beta Zoo Trail that goes through a portion of this property. And this property also has some upland potential for a variety of uses for the city, whether it be for city facilities or for housing or other things. But for the most part, acquiring this would allow us to not have to purchase an easement for a portion of the alignment for the trail. And it also has a lot of degraded wetlands on the property, well over 3 acres that could potentially be used for mitigation, whether that be for the Beta Zoo Trail, some sea level rise project, or some other mitigation for another project that the city has. So Staff saw this as a good acquisition for the city, and so had discussions with the bank, made an offer, went to the planning commission, discussed this with the planning commission about acquiring it and getting a recommendation. The planning commission recommended unanimously to pursue the acquisition. And so with that, staff's asking council to approve a resolution to acquire 1429 Sunny Avenue and authorize the city manager to execute all the documents and approve an appropriation of $337,000 and $337,250 from the general fund to pay for the property. If you guys have any questions, I'm available.
Questions? Councilmember Moulton?
I say there's the potential for developing housing there. Can we make a commitment to developing housing there?
I think that would come up at a later date. We need to do a lot more studies on the property. Right now, we know for sure that the alignment can go in there. We know for sure that there's a potential for mitigation as far as what the upland area exactly is, what setbacks look like, what the geotech looks like, which is basically looking at the earth and making sure that we can build things on there. I think we need to do more analysis for that. And at some point in time when there is a decision to do something with that property, that would likely come back to council for a discussion.
Okay. We have sort of a baseline strategy of putting housing wherever we can, right? Just
Yes, and seeing as though this property has been in the state that is, this property, to be honest with you, we've had a lot of abatement issues on. We first got hired in 2006, and I think in 2007 I was with Councilmember Bauer looking at this property over some violations that have been going on there. So there are some unknowns with the property, but we feel comfortable that the investment for this is more than worth the value for the trail and the mitigation potential there. As far as development, I think we just need to do more looking into it.
okay. Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to comment that I asked to have this poll because I heard about it on the radio, and it seemed like folks weren't really sure what we were talking about doing with this, and I just wanted to put that out there as a matter of transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll take it out to the public. Is there anyone here to comment on this item? No? Online?
Althea?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the process of trying to buy a house over in the Myrtle Beret area. And when I saw the other day that the city was buying that particular parcel, I was really happy to see that because I had seen the listing on Zillow and thought it looked like something from a horror film. So I'm really glad that the city will be buying that and hopefully developing it, you know, maybe a small couple of apartments and like a public bathroom / park district field house or something. I don't know, but I'm really glad to see it. So you have my support.
Thank you. You see anybody else?
I do not.
So we'll close public comment, bring it back to council for a motion or vote. About motion and a vote.
I'll motion to approve F5.
I'll second.
Okay,
And,
so we,
and I just wanted to say real
Sure.
quick. You know, I think this site could be useful for the city in a variety of ways. For certain, you know, I do think it's too early to make a determination about how we'll use it. I think for sure, you know, a trail, potentially housing, and, you know, there's a variety of uses that it could, you know, be put to for the city. I'm curious, you know, I know we have our housing element that, you know, we've kind of set in place. What might be other opportunities to kind of think critically in terms of how this property might be used?
You know, for city facilities, as the public comment had spoke about, I mean, it could be a mixed use. It could be a park. It could be a facility for the city. You know, we right now we have a facilities master plan, and we're looking at a lot of different options on how to proceed with that. We're going to be coming back to council with some more information on that soon. But we have a need for other facilities. We have facilities that are in the sea level rise location and the tsunami zone that should be relocated. There's a lot of different options that could be used for this property there, and its location is good for a lot of those, and some may not be so good for others. But there's definitely a lot of different. The upland area there is approximately 2 acres, and so there's a lot of different things that could happen there.
And just a quick follow related to the facilities master plan. We hired a consultant for that a couple of years ago, and we're just kind of waiting for the summary of that.
So it started in 2019. I think it was completed in 2022. I don't know exactly when, but it has been completed. And we use it as a reference. We're trying to bring that up with our reserve policy that's going to be coming to council to talk about, the dire need of our facilities and how we need to plan in the future to make sure that we have a sustainable facilities plan here. We, have a lot of old buildings. There's discussion in that about building new or remodeling and doing stuff like that. And so I think that needs to be prioritized, and there needs to be a mechanism set up so that it's sustainable and we can get the funding set aside on an annual basis so that we can accomplish a long-term goal of making sure that we have appropriate facilities for the city.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any other comments? Please vote.
Unanimous yes vote. Motion carries.
Moving to approve the stuff of nightmares.
Thank you. Yeah. So now we'll move on to legislative correspondence. Does anyone have anything they wanted to bring forward this evening? No? Okay. Ordinances and resolutions. SB 1383, Mandatory Organics Reduction Disposal Ordinance. Project Manager Pratzker.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Robin Prasker with the Community Services Department. I'm an environmental project manager, and tonight I'll be bringing you an update to Chapter 51 of the Solid Waste City Ordinance due to SB 1383, and this will be the first of 2 readings. SB 1383 is California's short-lived climate pollutants initiative, which has prompted this ordinance update. SB 1383 is a mandate to combat climate change by reducing disposal of organic waste. Organic waste in the landfill is more problematic than methane is more problematic than CO2, and this has caused the state to create a goal to reduce organic waste by 75% and to recover 20% of edible food that is currently being thrown away. Organic waste is a term for food waste and green waste, and it basically means anything that was ever alive. And edible food is any food that is fit for human consumption, and we're looking to prevent it from spoiling so we can recover it to be eaten. And it is up to cities and counties to implement this state mandate. SB 1383 requires a huge lift by our California cities, and our staff have been hard at work for over a year planning and implementing this mandate. We have taken a regional approach to this requirement, recognizing that each city has the same requirements to fulfill, and we're looking not to duplicate efforts, but become stronger together. It has been quite successful, and it is the strongest our regional solid waste team ever has been. This image here is a high-level overview of SB 1383 requirements that we are working on, which I will breeze through, and then we'll get into the ordinance for tonight. Major responsibilities that the city is responsible for by the state is curbside collection of organics, donation of edible food by certain business types, general education and outreach for all new programs, the procurement of recycled paper and recovered organic waste products, expanding edible food recovery capacity, and monitoring general compliance and enforcement of these new programs. Now that we've covered the newest state regulation and the requirements impacting our city code, I will now discuss how we are proposing to implement these changes. Chapter 51 is the entire chapter covering solid waste regulations in Eureka. It ranges from our current mandatory curbside garbage and recycling service to how we bill for services to littering and much more in between. As SB 1383 requirements had quite a bit of overlap with our existing code, it made the most sense to repeal and replace the entire chapter. This has allowed us to clean up the existing chapter, such as making things more clear and easy to read, along with including updated requirements by the state, which is quite expansive. We've aligned current city policy with new state policy, as the nature of waste management has transformed quite a bit over the years. We also found that our definitions were much too expansive and worked to only define terms that were necessary. So this is both a modernization update and a regulatory update. For new additions to the code, this is a brief list of the new additions, but I will go into detail on the next slides. So within the new updates, we have the mandatory curbside collection of organics. We currently have mandatory garbage and recycling with an optional green waste program. And the third bin for organics will become mandatory. When that service is available, we are working on the infrastructure needed to implement such a service. There will be new de minimis waivers specifically for commercial properties, which generate insignificant amounts of organic waste to allow them to not have that third bin and retain their 2-bin system. There are certain businesses that will be required to contract with food recovery organizations, donate all their excess food, maintain associated records, and receive annual inspections. We will be monitoring for contamination to ensure customers are placing proper materials in the proper bin, our hauler helping with that, and there'll be associated records and enforcement for those programs. There's also a requirement for waste haulers to provide SB 1383 compliant services, such as transporting materials to the proper locations, color compliant bins, and labels. For procurement, the city must procure a certain quantity of organic waste recovered products and recycled paper products. This concludes my overview of what has prompted this change and how we approach this update and what is newly required by the state. Staff are available for questions, and there is a recommended motion for when you're ready, but I'll go ahead and close the screen for now until you're ready for that motion.
Great. Do we have questions? Councilmember Moulton and then Castellano.
I have a short list here, but something you just said caught my ear. You said there's a requirement for for the city to use a certain amount of recycled paper. Is that like a percentage or literally a certain number of pages?
There's 2 different pieces to that I think I might have made confusing. So for the paper, we have to ensure that paper products contain at least 30% recycled content if it is no more expensive than the non-recycled paper content counterpart. The other piece of that is the recovered organic waste products. There is a certain amount by ton or cubic yard of mulch or compost we must procure every year. And that's a tricky one. We've been working with City Manager Slattery to wrap our heads around how we can comply with that. We've also been talking with CalRecycle about any barriers that we might have. They have a formula based off population that they've applied to every city and county in the state. And it's a shocking number of tons of compost or mulch.
Wow. Okay. And then that would be...
Our fields would be about 6 feet in the air after the 5th year.
And that would be shipped in from out of the area because we don't have a facility that produces that at that quantity.
Correct.
Locally.
That's another one of our gripes with CalRecycle for them to understand that unfortunately there is no mulch or compost being made locally that is from recovered organic waste. That's the key there.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I do have some other questions. You mentioned expanding recovery of edible foods. Expand how? I mean, what would be the expansion there?
Basically, what the mandate says is that with all of these new businesses needing to donate food that's not currently being donated, if our food recovery network is unable to take that additional food due to their capacity, it is up to the jurisdictions to try to identify where those shortcomings are and help to expand them.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you. Could you give me an example of a kind of business that will be doing food recovery that isn't now? Maybe not a specific business, but like what kind of things are we talking about?
Yeah, so one of them is grocery stores, I believe larger than 10,000 square feet or based off our revenue minimum. So basically our larger grocery stores hit that. So Winco, Co-op,
okay,
those ones. There's also food distributors and then restaurants of a certain size. So there's tier 1 generators and tier 2 generators. Tier 1 starts this year. Tier 2 starts next year. We have done basically a study that's identified all of those businesses, made contact with them, find out what they're currently doing. And that is something that we are continuing to work on this year. We haven't quite implemented that report. That's something that staff is working on currently and hopes to have implemented by the end of the year.
Oh, darn. That was my next question. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Castellano?
Okay. I just wanted to be clear in this and make sure I didn't miss anything. There's certain agreements with our franchise collector. Is it basically then up to them to develop the contracts for who gets the organic waste, or is that like kind of a further process?
Is this related to the procurement requirement or outside of that?
I just wasn't. I mean, as you know, I'm on the board of HWMA, and and there's a lot of kind of just negotiations over kind of who has control over waste and things like that. And so I was just wondering, is that kind of a separate agreement that we're coming back with later, or will it be, right now our franchise hauler is Recology, or will they be making separate agreements with, whomever the waste goes to?
Yeah, I think the best answer I have right now without coming back with further information is that this ordinance update tonight is very much about what the state is requiring our ordinance reflects. When it comes to future organics processing and what systems and contracts and protocols we have in place, I don't quite know what that will look like. But if there is a need for the city code to back up, reflect, or reinforce that process, we'll certainly come back with that.
Perfect. And then tier 2, I was just thinking it's, I know a number of restaurants and, in that kind of tier, I think that would be in that tier 2 category that might need some support. Will we be offering classes or, webinars or anything like that where they could get more support in meeting some of these mandates, or has that been happening already?
Yeah, so part of the mandate, which is very good, is that we have education and outreach responsibilities. We will be diligently reporting on them every year, outlining who we've made contact with in what form. And all of that does include what their requirements are, how to reduce waste, how to compost properly. So what we're doing this year to kind of get our bearings straight of what that will look like is we're actually partnering regionally to put out an RFP to hire an edible food recovery manager who would provide that service across the county consistently to all the businesses that are tier 1 and tier 2. And we feel like that will be a good year to kind of see what does it take. Is that something we could do in-house moving forward? Is the regional thing work? So yes, later this year we should have a consultant who will be doing all of that for us, and we'll be able to evaluate if it's effective.
Great. And then, sorry, 2 more questions I think for now. Would it be possible in this ordinance to create a mandate around, I was just thinking of compostable food containers for, larger food producers, so that we're, kind of already sort of thinking forward of, not only are people producing food, but they're producing food that goes into containers.
I think that our environmental programs have always been interested in potential bans or limitations on certain materials, depending on if they're not recyclable or not compostable. We haven't quite treaded into that territory yet. It's something that the Zero Waste Action Plan is looking at. I do know the city of Arcata has recently implemented a similar mandate. So I think the door is open for that. Whether that's something we're interested in right now or not, I think we'd have to continue to vet internally and with you all, potentially in another conversation. I might look to Miles to see if he has anything in addition to that.
Project Manager Prasker said it perfectly. I would say that if we're looking at those types of things, that it would be done via another ordinance. It's a solid waste ordinance. And so if we were looking at bans of, takeout materials or straws or whatever that may be, that would be something done separately in its own ordinance. And as Project Manager Prasker said, the Zero Waste Action Plan goes through those kind of guidelines to have things brought back to council for consideration.
Okay. And then dogs and cats, they can go in the trash. I never knew. Is there a better way or a better place?
Hold on.
Sorry, I hadn't ever thought of that, and I read it and I was kind of shocked.
So that is not new. That has been in the code.
Right.
And when we verified with our hauler that 25-pound limit is accurate or subject to change by the transfer facility. So that's not new. It was revetted. So I don't have too much more to add.
Okay, thanks. That's all for now.
Councilmember Bauer.
It seems like kind of a heavy lift for all cities. I know Cal Cities, we've been talking about it, at the state level. Like, how do we implement this? And talking to Cal Recycle, are they going to provide any funding to help us implement? I mean, we all agree it's an important thing we need to do, but is there a funding source that's going to help us, make it?
We certainly would like to see more funding. We continue to advocate for that. Cal Recycle is in the middle of releasing a grant specifically for organics processing, which the regional team is looking at applying for to help HWMA prepare the infrastructure needed for our curbside program. But I think there's a lot more financial support they could provide, certainly in the edible food recovery sector as well. If we have to increase food bank capacity, we will definitely be looking for funding from them. So there is always a strategy of advocating and sending letters of support and all of that. And I think staff will remain diligent. And if there's any actions our council can take to make it clear to the state that we do need that support.
Okay, great. Thank you. And one more question. If somebody is composting on their own, and I know a lot of people do, I do, can there be a de minimis waiver for self-composting? I should say not recycling, but composting. Is that something we've thought of? Is that possible? Is it in there? Because I thought the de minimis was if you were our small producer of waste, you can get a de minimis waiver, but I didn't hear about composting.
That's a great question. So at this time, tonight, staff is not recommending that there's a waiver specifically for that. The reason being is that there's certain materials like bones and dairy that's not best fit for home compost. And then that person would still need an alternative service for those special items. So at this time, the way that we're crafting the program and seeking approval for is to have the mandatory 3-bin system. And if folks want to, in addition to that home compost, drop off to a community compost, they're welcome to do that. But we are looking to have the consistent 3-bin system across the board, short of a de minimis for commercial. Or alternatively, we have our exemption program for folks who produce little to no waste, but that makes you exempt from the entire 3-bin system. So there might be folks who might home compost, not have a lot of trash. What little trash they have, they might self-haul. So an exemption might be a good fit for them. And we currently have that program, and that will continue, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Contreras-Deloach.
Do you know how much of if it's going to make much of a difference on the cost of that green bin?
That's a great question. At this time, we don't have any pricing available. We're still developing the infrastructure needed. So that will come down the line once that infrastructure is created. We negotiate with the hauler. Then we will begin to see cost proposals, which will, of course, come back to you through the renegotiation of the hauler contract.
Councilmember Moulton.
How many customers on the residential side do you expect to, how many folks have 2 bins that will need to go up to 3 bins?
I believe the number's in the ballpark of 4,000.
What percentage of the?
I'm seeing the table in my head. I've looked at it many times. I would say about.
Slattery has his finger on the button.
Oh.
Well, I don't know an exact number. You may know more of an exact number, but when I was running the program, about 10 to 20% of the folks had a green bin system for residential, and we have 8,000 accounts total.
More or less.
And so, that number shouldn't have changed that much.
So currently 10 to 20% of people have a green waste and they can add this process in, but 80% of the folks in the city are going to have to add that.
Correct.
And it's very preliminary. I mean, ideally, we would be using that same system and having the same collection for the economy of scale and making sure that it keeps the costs down, especially from the collection standpoint. But depending on where we're at with how we process it, do we do composting? Do we do an anaerobic digester? Where we're at with that has a lot to do with what you collect, how you collect it, how many bins you have, those type of things. A 3-bin system doesn't necessarily. We could end up having 4 if we have to separate. We don't want to do that, but there's a potential that you would have to separate your green waste from your organic waste.
So we're still working out how to match the collection with the facilities, with the end goal of the process, but that all kind of needs to be figured out specifically.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Contreras-Deloach?
I think it might have just been answered.
Great. Okay. Any further questions? Councilmember Fernandez?
So when you were detailing the type of grocery stores that would be affected by this, you said that they were over 10,000 square feet in size. So we're, considering like Safeway or E&F, those type of places, I assume. So how would this affect places like Walmart or Costco then?
That's a great question. Without the list in front of me, I can't confirm if they're on the list. I'm pretty sure Costco is. I do know that there's in the legal guidance, it explains how to deal with stores that have a grocery store within the store. I don't have the reference in front of me tonight, but the state's very specific in who is a tier 1 generator. And gosh, I couldn't tell you tonight if Walmart is on the list without having it in front of me.
Councilmember Moulton?
I'd like to make the motion. If everybody's good.
Oh, actually, we haven't had public comment
right.
yet.
Sorry.
So, yeah. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we'll open up to the public for comment. Is there anyone here that's come to talk about this item? Anybody on Zoom? No? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council for a motion and a vote and comments. Councilmember Moulton?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I move we waive read by title only and introduce bill number 1025-CS, an ordinance of the City Council repealed in its entirely and replaced with Chapter 51, Solid Waste Sections 51.01-51.33.
Second.
Okay. Any further comments? Councilmember Castellano?
Just real quick. I think my first month on council, I talked about wanting restaurants to switch to compostable food containers, and we haven't done it yet. I just feel like I'm so eager. I know we're not doing it tonight, but I just want to voice that right here. And then also, I don't know. I mean, I'm okay. I know this is how it's been, that people can put small animals in the trash, but I guess I just want to say I feel like there's a better way, and maybe we should look into that in the future, because I don't know. I just feel like that's even just for the people doing the collection, maybe also hard. Just thinking about that.
Thank you. Okay. No further comments. Please vote.
Unanimous yes vote, motion carries.
Okay, so we've had a request for a bio break, so we'll be back in 8 minutes.
And Jesse, you're here tonight to cover various parts of the presentation and the study. It is a meaty topic, but we're going to do our best to keep this to 20 minutes total. We went through, I have 3 minutes, Brett has 10, Jesse has 7. Hopefully we can stick to it, but I'm not positive. And questions, will be beyond that. Why are we looking at climate change and sea level rise through the capital improvement program. Kristen Kenyon, principal planner, forecasted this during her hazards presentation of the LCP when she presented on the 17th of January. As a coastal city with a built-out waterfront, Eureka has a lot of infrastructure that is vulnerable to natural processes currently, and even more so in the future with sea level rise that's coming at us. The capital improvement program allows us to plan ahead for necessary upgrades to our infrastructure, and that's typically a 5-year look ahead. We are starting to develop longer-term capital improvement processes, and this is one of them. Looking out farther into the future and focusing on public city-owned infrastructure, which, a lot of which is along the waterfront. In some cases, looking at how we can protect that infrastructure or adapt that infrastructure over time also helps to protect private property, though that private property is not the focus of this study or of any of the adaptation projects that are going to be presented. This study came after work that's already been completed, including the climate change readiness and adaptation plan for the wastewater treatment plant and some of the infrastructure associated with it. The Jacobs Avenue sea level rise study, which was done in partnership with the county and Caltrans. This tiered off of that work and applied it to the rest of the city's waterfront using some of the same methodology. So going beyond the bathtub model that's historically been used to look at what happens with sea level rise in the future, and also looks at, rather than what the range of predictions for sea level rise might be, instead focuses on what observations can we make in the future based on water levels that we see to kind of forecast what impacts might be coming a little bit further down the road, and allowing us to plan ahead for those and get in front of particular issues that might come up. So what are we seeking to do? We want to shed light on the issue of sea level rise due to both climate change and subsidence, demystify it, make it a little bit less scary, and understand the scope and scale of the hazards and potential timelines. And like I said, look at the range of predictions that are out there, but focus on triggers that we can observe to lead us to make decisions in the future. Brett is going to do a little bit of a presentation on what was studied and the impacts that are predicted, whereas Jesse's going to take it from there and focus on adaptation projects and what comes next. So with that, I will hand it off to Brett, and we'll all be available for questions at the end.
Thanks, Brian. Some technical difficulties. Okay, thanks, Council and Honorable Mayor. So as we looked, as the Public Works Director indicated, I'm going to kind of give you an overview of kind of the study area, the hydrodynamic modeling that we did, and kind of the take-home messages, and all in the context of the sea level rise. So looking at the study area, we developed an updated model that really focused on from Elk River over to Eureka Slough along the shoreline. And then we leaned on some previous studies, as were indicated for Jacobs Avenue and kind of back on Ryan Slough, and then also a previous project on Martin Slough. So we kind of divided the study area into 7 segments. So you can see in the graphic there, the Martin Slough drainage area, that's largely from the golf course out to Highway 101, kind of the low elevation lands along the slough channel. And that slough channel is somewhat protected by a tide gate. Then from 101 along the Elk River to Truesdale. So that kind of includes the area of Pound Road, where there was the recent restoration project on the Elk River, as well as the wastewater treatment plant. Then from Truesdale to Del Norte Street, so kind of behind the Bayshore Mall and Palco Marsh, that shoreline is kind of largely comprised of some engineering rock for protection along there. Then from Del Norte Street to L Street. So that's really where the heart of the development is in Eureka, and very much a developed shoreline with various industries and businesses. Then from L Street to Hill Street, so that kind of wraps around that point around to Eureka Slough. And then we also looked at Jacobs Avenue, which was part of another study, and then Ryan Slough at Myrtle Avenue. So that's a little outside of city limits, but the city does have important infrastructure out there with their water booster station. So it's important to understand the timeline when we're thinking about sea level rise and thinking about the capital improvement program and the projects associated with them. The city's CIP plans implementation projects, as a public works director mentioned, it's kind of a 5-year look ahead. So you're implementing projects within the next 5 years, and then you want to consider the lifespan of those projects. So that might be in the 20 to 30 year time frame. So it kind of puts us out into around 2050, 2060, and we're seeing the models and kind of the science indicates that we're going to see somewhere around a foot to a foot and a half of sea level rise in that time. And then you also kind of want to be mindful of what's in the more distant future for those larger infrastructure projects as you build those that are going to have a longer lifespan. What do you need to really plan for 2070 and potentially beyond? So we can use recent observations and also models to give us a sense of the likely future conditions and identify triggers to make sure the city is on track for replacement, upkeep, protection, or relocation of the city infrastructure. So a good example of this is the tides that we saw just this past January. So what you see in this graphic is the blue line are the predicted tides. So that's just the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon kind of predict the tides. What you see in the red line is the actual water levels. You'll see those red lines kind of start to diverge in the early January. That's when we got those big storms, huge wave events. The storm surge came in. We saw water levels increase between a foot and 2 feet above predicted. So you can kind of see that as an indicator of what future water levels may look like. But then later in January, we had the king tide. It was on a calm day, but we had a water level pretty much equal to that of kind of a more typical high tide and the storm surge. But those kind of indicate, what the future might look like. And then we also have events such as in 2005, 2006, that New Year's storm when Highway 101 was closed. And that was really the tide of record for this area when water levels, it was the combination of a king tide and a storm surge both happening at the same time, which is fairly low probability that both of those would happen at the exact same time, but they did, and we saw those kind of really increase water levels. So we can use those as indicators for what we would see maybe on a annual basis, maybe more regular than that, in the future as we plan. And then we can also use models to really look at even higher water levels that we haven't really seen here. Now, the public works director mentioned the bathtub model. So this was a good kind of indication of where there's low-lying areas around the bay, but it's also a huge simplification of how water flows over the landscape. There was recent investment in LiDAR topography throughout the bay, and then there's been advancement in hydraulic modeling software. So we can really kind of get more at the question of what does this really look at the landscape on a landscape scale. And so what we see is that, in the middle graphic, that's the simple projection of an elevation over the landscape for sea level rise. This example being mean high water, so our average high tide plus 2.5 feet. And the middle graphic kind of shows that simplification, anything that's under that elevation. But when you consider where there is higher ground along the shoreline, where the land has been diked, or where the timing of how water flows over the land, the more realistic picture is on the right side. So this is more of a dramatic example of the differences between that bathtub model and an advanced hydrodynamic model. But we have that technology now where we can really look and ask those questions. Where does the water come in? How long does the flooding last? What are the pathways for that flooding? And how deep is that flooding? It's significantly different whether you get an inch of flooding or several feet of flooding. So we developed the model to show us this. You know, in the graphics that were presented to you, they kind of walk through the flooding and then the various infrastructure that may be affected. But we can see that those pathways in this graphic showing the blue arrows of where that water starts to come over the shoreline, the different colors, the darker blue being deeper water, the lighter blue being shallower water, and then also indications of how long does that flooding last. So then we can ask the question of how is infrastructure affected? And when we're thinking about the city infrastructure, you know, we're thinking about roads, roads and trails, your utilities, and your drainage infrastructure. So for roads and trails, you know, what was unique when we were looking at the county and then the city's project around Jacobs Avenue on Eureka Slough, is we look back at this, you know, example. There was 2005, 2006 New Year's storm, and while it presented, you know, very hazardous driving conditions, you can see that the northbound lane was still open and traffic was able to go. The southbound lane, you know, was eventually closed. That lasted about 6 hours. We would have expected that would have caused widespread damage. We didn't really find any indication of Caltrans damage reports asking for dollars the way that they ask for in landslides or when, you know, a roadway gets washed out. There was significant debris spread out, and it was a cleanup that was required, and there were dollars and effort put towards that. But roads can get flooded. We live in a very wet environment, and the difference between, you know, an inch of flooding or, you know, 6 inches of flooding, we have plenty of roads that do flood that way. But you need to differentiate that shallow flooding from, you know, more severe flooding. And how often does that occur? It can happen regularly on roads, but, you know, how does that impact our movement through our communities, and how does that actually impact the infrastructure? When we think about water and sewer lines, there's nothing inherently wrong with a water line being in a wet environment. We have water lines that go underneath the bay that serve as major transmission lines. We have water lines that go through wetlands. It's an access challenge, but it's not necessarily an engineering or a challenge to be able to work with those water lines. However, you know, with sewer, it's a little more challenging. Just the line being in the water, and if it starts to get inundated, the city will start to deal with more, we call it inflow and infiltration. So water going into the sewer lines will increase the flows to the wastewater treatment facility. That causes some challenges for treating that wastewater. But they can be in wet environments. What is really more of a challenge is pump stations and lift stations. If your electrical equipment and your pumps are affected, then it really inhibits the ability for the city to operate those facilities. And then the last part of that is kind of, we think about location. There are areas that the shoreline has some erosion, starting to see some of those lines be exposed. That would, you know, continue to happen, but we want to think about that location and their proximity to the shoreline. And then kind of the last part of infrastructure is drainage infrastructure. So, you know, as you walk through the city, you see drain inlets, and a storm event, you know, water rushes through the streets into the drain inlets and then through pipes and out to the bay. They can also act as conduits from the bay into the streets. So as we see these higher tides start to come in, then the tide water comes into the drainage facilities, into those pipes. It takes up available storage if there were a storm event as well. And then that tidal water can come up through the drain inlet. So it's more of it could be a conduit for flooding. And so our approach with this study was to model the exposure, evaluate the sensitivity, and then identify projects. So I'll go through some key takeaways just from that exposure and sensitivity, and then I'll pass it over to the city engineer, and he'll talk a little bit about the adaptation. But as I show you these graphics, this is kind of in that range, you know, projecting out to about 2050. What's happening in that 0.5 foot to 1.5 feet of sea level rise? So when we start at a half foot to a foot of sea level rise stacked on top of your typical king tide, so those are, your highest tides of the year. It's going to happen a few times that they're pretty high, kind of during this season. What we see is that it's kind of shallow flooding, a little bit of overtopping, and we don't see a whole lot, especially even in this low area near the Elk River Slough. We see kind of similar story as we go behind Bayshore Mall, a little bit of flooding coming over the shoreline and into the low-lying areas, going in and out of Palco Marsh as it does now. And then some flooding, as I talked about, coming up from some of the storm drains and into the streets around Commercial and Waterfront and Coster Avenue, and then a little bit on the low-lying lands where the shoreline is low near the boat basin. So then as we go more into the 1 to 1.5 feet of sea level rise, we start to see more effects. So down at the wastewater treatment plant, we still see that the wastewater treatment plant is protected by high ground, but we do start to see flows coming over Pound Road and then over Highway 101 down near the Herrick overpass. And we're starting to see kind of more widespread flooding. We see it more widespread coming out of the storm drains around Commercial and Coster, so those same low-lying locations. And then also around in Jacobs Avenue. What's interesting about Jacobs Avenue is that most of that water kind of comes between Brainerd and Braidcut, goes into the low-lying lands, and then flows south over land and then makes its way to Jacobs Avenue. A lot of this flooding on the roadways is probably in the vicinity of about a foot, and it lasts for about 4 to 5 hours. And it could happen 3 days in a row. So when we think about those times when there's king tides, you get those high tides. The king tide is on one day, but the day before and the day after, it's only a couple tenths of a foot difference. So it may happen for several hours, for multiple days, and then you don't see it happen for an extended period of time. The other thing that we see is when we're looking at this king tide plus a foot to a foot and a half of sea level rise, and I should note that it could also be storm surge, as we see with those storms previously. Is that we start to see flooding in and near the pump stations and lift stations, and this is kind of a little more critical to make sure that they were planning to address this as because just flooding once of a facility like this, could cause damage, and if we prevent that, we really want to focus on it. And then as sea levels increase, as we start to look, to the future, 2070, 2100, and for those large pieces of infrastructure, the flooding obviously doesn't get better, but it's a longer planning horizon, and we start to see kind of just more flooding propagate inland as we march into the future. And so then with that, I'll pass it over to the city engineer to talk a little bit about adaptation.
Thank you, Brett. So I'm gonna kind of roll into what we talk about in the plan as far as what are we hoping to get out of adaptation? What is our strategy? How are we looking at it? And then what are those next steps? There's kind of an unofficial plan goal for this plan, which is to identify areas we need to focus on and come up with adaptation concepts in those areas. There's kind of two main points that we look at when we're talking about adaptation. There's a trigger elevation, so we kind of need to know what elevation are we looking at needing to take action, or what elevation are we looking at needing a buffer in order to provide ourselves planning time to budget, to do any advanced planning that we need to be able to be in a position that we can make good decisions and be able to adapt in a way that is much more comfortable. The next part of this is the approach, and how do you approach adaptation? Well, there's kind of 4 different general approaches to adaptation. There's accommodate. So you accommodate in place the rising sea levels, you protect in place. There's defend, that's hold the line. That could either be with a natural softening of the shoreline with a shoreline ecotone, where you're filling out and creating a transitional habitat that helps have a higher elevation and protect certain infrastructure where that's possible. There's also hardened infrastructure in areas where maybe you can't do a more natural approach, where you need to have a riprap or a wall or something along those lines in order to provide a hard line of protection. There's also retreat. There's areas where maybe it doesn't make sense for us to try to accommodate in place or defend. We need to step away from this area, and look and see that in the coming future, this area here is not going to have infrastructure. We can move infrastructure out of there. Maybe there's no private development there that'll be impacted, but that's one strategy. And then really, what probably makes more sense is a combination of those three above, right? You're trying to use all the tools that you have to make good decisions to try to accommodate rising sea levels. So this is an example of what our adaptation mapping looks like. I've kind of pulled a couple of pop-ups out here in the center. On the left here is the key that kind of talks about elevate ground, an alternative for elevating the ground, modification to habitat. Maybe we're talking about like a ecotone or something along the shoreline. And then on the right, you see kind of the general water levels that we're discussing for this particular, for adapting our infrastructure to. This area in particular, this is kind of the northeast corner of Eureka. You can see some identified pump stations. We have roadways, parks, trails, all sorts of city infrastructure that's right along the coast. And you can see that darker blue water. That's where we're seeing rising sea levels come into play. Now we're kind of jumping to the south end of town over by the Herrick overcrossing at Pound Road. Here you can see, I'm going to kind of jump into a little bit more detail about perhaps adaptation strategies that we've looked at in this area. And when you look at these maps, you can't think of it as like, okay, this is everything that we're talking about doing right now. You have to think about it from the standpoint of, here's some strategies that we might need to implement more near term. We might need to be looking at more of a long-term solution 50 to 100 years out from now. We really, it's a broad brush strokes that we took out with this plan because we're really talking about a varying time frame and also varying water levels that we're not exactly sure where they're going to be. We can't put a finger on it and say it's going to be exactly this level 25 years from now. We say, okay, it's going to be in this range of elevations, and so we need to start to plan, at X, when we see an elevation set at X, so that we can go out there and have time to plan and budget for needed improvements. So in this particular area, this is, Brett kind of noted this before, and when he went through, this is the wastewater treatment plant on the right-hand side, which is elevated pretty high. We don't see impacts to that area there, but what we do see impacts to is Pound Road. We see impacts to the waterfront trail, which if you see to the top, you'll see relocate trail to elevated ground and rail corridor. That's one option, kind of maybe in a more of a midterm, where you have water come over the trail every now and then. In a more near-term event where, okay, the trail might be closed for a period of time, that's okay. We can have the trail closed for small periods of time and still allow access out there. It's not a hazard. It's not an issue for folks as long as it's, well signed. But maybe in the long term, we need to pull the trail back from there. And one option that we show here is to elevate or to move the trail to the rail prism, which is higher elevated than what the waterfront trail, in this case, the Hicksari Trail, is out near the Elk River Slough. So that's one type of strategy that we're looking at here with these adaptation plans for, in that case, the trail. We also have Pound Road and the Pound Road lift station identified on the left-hand side. And there you see a construct ecotone slope. So what an ecotone slope is a set slope of habitat that goes out at a given percentage of slope away from the structure that you're elevating. So you elevate the trail, which is Pound Road. You elevate your pump station or relocate your pump station if possible. And then you can create an ecotone so that as sea level rises transition, you have a transition in habitat type, which helps offset, impacts right at the shoreline. You'll see two different kind of berm or elevation, and I'll explain what that is. The dark yellow line that runs around the outside of the treatment plant and over the elevated rail prism, that's kind of a one level of kind of protect or kind of a level that you would fall back on as an adaptation strategy. Another level that you could look at would be to come back all the way to along Highway 101 and inside the the marsh area here, which is part of the treatment plant. Part of it is freshwater marsh. Part of it's our overflow marsh. So there's a couple different strategies here we could look at. And maybe these are strategies that over time you roll one out first and then go to another. Maybe there's some environmental benefit that's there that'll allow us to move infrastructure and adapt that way. So generally speaking, the plan looks at kind of very broad brush options for adaptation. And then this particular area, obviously there's a lot going on. You have Highway 101, there's coordination with Caltrans, we have a wastewater treatment plant, you have ecological features, you have private property. This is one of those areas where we need further study. And that's what the plan kind of identifies, like, hey, this area here, this is one of the areas that we're going to want to take a closer look at. This plan doesn't get into the details of like exactly what we're going to do. This kind of gives us the idea of, okay, here's a spot we need to look at. Here's some things we should probably be addressing and starting to look at. Here's some time frames. And then we move ahead with having a study that gets into more detail on a particular area like this. Another area, and only cover a couple more here that we looked at. We looked at the entire waterfront, of course. This particular is an interesting situation. This is Palco Marsh, Parcel 4, back behind the Bayshore Mall. What we see is inundation of Palco Marsh pretty much throughout. We see inundation on Parcel 4. We see a couple different, what we've come up with is a couple different strategies of retreat, so to speak. We can elevate the trail prism, which is the furthest out orange line where the trail currently exists in the railroad prism. That's fairly low, so we know that as rising water levels come, that's one option, is that trail could be elevated there. As we get further on in time, we might want to move the trail and any of the utility infrastructure that exists out there. We have sewer and water infrastructure out there as well. We might want to move back to the backside of Palco Marsh, and this whole area out here might become more of a retreat area for the city. So while we're probably not going to retreat away in the near term or midterm from like our center, our waterfront in Old Town, this is one of those areas where it might make more sense to have a phased retreat. And finally, this is kind of the northeast end of town, and I'm going to talk about the Hill Street pump station. That's in the lower right-hand corner down at the end of Tidd Street. So this particular piece of infrastructure, we knew it was low. The modeling, of course, confirmed that this is a low piece of infrastructure for us. It's a very important piece of infrastructure as far as it's one of 3 pump stations we have on the north and east side of town that brings sewer to the wastewater treatment plant. Here you see down there around it, it's kind of difficult to tell, but there is a small elevated berm that goes around the pump station. And then on the left-hand side here, what the diagram is showing is an opportunity that we see with our Beta Zoo trail to locate the trail on the outboard side of the pump station. So we have a trail facility that helps us create an elevated berm to protect the pump station. So these are multi-benefit projects. We see opportunities throughout the city to try to gain multiple benefits throughout in our adaptation planning. Again, this is one of those areas where this one doesn't need a specific plan to get into the details. It's pretty straightforward. We know the elevations, pump station. We have a trail project that could accommodate that. We need to have a trail through there on a prism, and it's a good fit for having to kind of get benefit for both projects. So what's next? As I mentioned, a more in-depth study of specific areas of immediate or near-term adaptation, which may support development of a public works plan. What's a public works plan? A public works plan, hopefully, is something we're going to work towards that is a document that will help us work with regulatory agencies such as the Coastal Commission to plan ahead for our entire our waterfront, our infrastructure, and to be able to have that dialogue and to come up with a game plan that is approved by regulatory agencies so that we can roll forward with some of these projects as they become necessary and not have to go through and take each one of them individually to the Coastal Commission or other agencies to get buy-in and to get them permitted. So that's one thing that this plan is hopefully going to help influence. Additionally, of course, we're going to have project development and CIP inclusion. So where we see needs and they work well with other project needs that we have, we're going to try to co-locate those or come up with strategies to be very efficient with our project planning. And of course, we need to continue to collaborate with other jurisdictions and partners. I mentioned Caltrans. We have a lot of other partners, whether they're public or private, around the city that we would need to work with in order to come up with good adaptation strategies. And then, of course, finally, we're just going to continue to monitor sea levels and how they rise and look at those trigger points. Our whole approach is to have points that we can look at and say, when we get to this point, we need to start planning, and that gives us a buffer of time so that we can do the financial planning, all the other planning that we need to do. So the monitoring really influences those set trigger points and when we need to decide to take action. And that's what we have for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councilmember Contreras Deloach?
I guess I was just wondering if you could explain or help me and maybe other people understand some of the projections on what sea level rise is maybe quite a bit higher and further inland than what you guys were discussing tonight. And so I was just curious why the discrepancy, like why is there kind of a difference between some of like the modeling that's on like NOAA and stuff like that. So I was wondering if you could help me understand.
I'm going to turn to Brett to a certain degree here, our technical expert on that question.
Yeah, so the Ocean Protection Council released a document in 2018. They give various projections. So the projections for how much sea level rise is based on different climate scenarios. So how much emissions are going out into the atmosphere, and then how does that affect sea level rise? So depending on those different emissions scenarios, that changes the trajectory of sea level rise. Also, just depending on when you work with these complex models, there's some variability between different models. So Jesse, if you want to go to one of those first slides, there are the various projections, but kind of depending on the different climate scenarios that you look at. So, there's a likely range, so kind of the upper bound and lower bound. So that's kind of that yellow band that you see. That's likely. So that means it's about a 66% chance that sea level rise is going to be within there. If, emissions are significantly higher than anticipated or projected, then you start to go up to that dashed blue line. So there's a 5% probability that it would go on that trajectory. And then there's a 0.5% probability that it would be on the higher end. So it kind of depends on your model inputs and what you're looking at in your climate scenarios, where there's variability. But the guiding source is the Ocean Protection Council and the 2018 document that we follow for California.
And I'd add to that I think that's what's really important about both the way the public works is looking at this as well as our planning for our local coastal program update is that it's based on triggers and benchmarks, so that we're not basing this off of, hey, we're expecting it to be here, so we're going to do all these things before that. We're waiting for it, not necessarily waiting, but we're monitoring so that when we reach these benchmarks, that these are the trigger items that make us start doing either retreat or protection or whatever it may be for whatever facility.
Go ahead.
I just following up. So I was looking at the California Ocean Protection Council's 2018 projections for Humboldt Bay area. And on there it said, as much as, so obviously that's that upper level you were saying, as much as 1 foot by 2030, 2 feet by 2050, and 3 feet by 2060. Not taking into the collapse of Thwaites Glacier, which no one knows how that's going to impact things. So. Yeah.
And a clarification is that the OPC has come out their draft updated guidance. They've done away with the H++ is what they referred to, because there wasn't, from my understanding, there wasn't statistical significance to what's the chance of that happening. But yeah, you're right. That's where that range is, where it's as much as depending on the emissions scenario that you're modeling. Yep.
Councilmember Bauer.
Yeah, thanks for the sobering presentation. Yeah, and I get what Councilmember Contreras-Deloach is saying. I mean, the reality is probably something more severe than what we're projecting. If you look at and talk to James Hansen and other scientists, their predictions are something way more drastic. But I think it's important when we're planning. I think it's great what we're trying to do, planning for a retreat, all these different accommodation, what have you. But it'd be really interesting to see what's the 50-year cost. Like in 50 years, what's our cost going to be to lift our pump stations, to build ecotones and 10-to-1 slopes and try and protect the infrastructure? And then what's the 100-year projection? And I know those costs will be in today's dollars, but we need to know, or this body in 50 years will need to know it's going to cost $200 million. Who's paying for that? And that's the reality, right? I mean, if you look at the dikes around Humboldt Bay, I think 80% are failing, and they were built 100 plus years ago. The reclamation districts don't have any money. They barely exist. Who's going to pay for all this stuff to protect our cities, not just Eureka, Arcata, on and on and on. So I think it'd be great to have not only a plan of what we're going to do over that time frame, but to have an idea of cost for sure, so that we can start planning what do we need to do, what kind of money are we going to need to save, how much money are we going to have to increase rates, because we know we're going to have to do these things. That's a fact. So we need to know that, and the community needs to know it, sooner than later, so that we can start planning for it. And we can go to the state and say, we expect you to help pay for this, or the feds. We've all kind of created this problem as a society. So I hope we really kind of look at the cost, because we all kind of know it's happening, and we see the flooding, we see things happening, but nobody knows what the costs are except for you guys. What it takes to lift a pump station and build levees, and be great to have that information at our hands in the coming years, when we develop a plan. So thank you. That was a great, really interesting presentation.
Thank you. Councilmember Castellano?
Yes, thank you for the report. Similarly to council members Contreras, DeLoach, and Bauer, I was just thinking about it would be great. I'm imagining this is probably what will be coming out of this, is kind of a prioritization of projects, costs, so we can really start to plan, forward. And then I was glad to hear you say that, future conversations will include Caltrans. Has there been much engagement? I know we've been working with Caltrans on, some of the trails and things like that. Has there been much engagement with them over this specifically, or?
Not a whole lot on this particular topic. We coordinate with them on all, like you mentioned, on a lot of projects across the board, transportation related. And we needed to make sure that we wanted to do our planning effort, not like trying to be in a vacuum, so to speak, but we needed to make sure that we were, accounting for our infrastructure. And they have a lot more going on is with their infrastructure and how they're approaching it. But no, we're getting to that point now, especially since we've started. Now we have some of our planning efforts under our belts that we can start to have those conversations. And like we mentioned, that area, Herrick, Pound Road, the highway there's, the conversations with staff you've had there, they're very open to partnering and working on collaborative options to help, protect both facilities, city owned and also Caltrans facilities.
Great. And then, there's a lot of coastline in California, and so I'm imagining there might be some grants and some funding, and then just the balance of like what the people of Eureka, what we will need to budget for. Do you have a sense of, in my understanding, I could be wrong, so please correct me, is that the more kind of responsive and proactive we are, the more likely there might be funding available versus, waiting 10 years, to start implementing plans. Do you have that sense, or what do you think about kind of grant funding, state funding, federal funding?
No, I like it. And I think we've had a couple conversations with funding agencies, and I think there's opportunities for us to go after those funds in certain locations. it's difficult to kind of get at the entire city at once. But, there's certain planned locations, some of the ones we identified here, where there's interest, I think, and there's potential dollars that we could go after to do some of that next level planning of like, okay, we need to dig into the details of what are these alternatives? What do those alternatives mean? Start to get into some of the more sticky topics with, how do we get through permitting in some of these areas? Because, we can have the conversation here about how this all functions, but there's a whole nother level that we have to get to with how does the Coastal Commission feel about that? And that's a different conversation, so to speak. But yeah, I think the money is out there and we're certainly going to be going after it.
Councilmember Contreras Deloach.
Sorry, I just had a blank on what I was going to ask you. Okay, sorry. Since our bay is experiencing a faster rate because we're sinking as well as combined with sea rise, so we're the fastest on the coast. I guess I'm curious, since that's known, and which means that we're going to need to do things quicker and than other coastline throughout the state. Is that something that can be reflective in how we pursue funds from California? That we're in kind of a more urgent situation, a more imminent situation?
I think so, because and Brett can correct me if I'm wrong, but our modeling captures that. And so with that model capturing that, it shows where our water surface elevations can be. And I think we can use that as leverage when it comes to showing that we do have a need that is more, pressing.
Yeah, and I would add, for like federal funding for hazard mitigation grant program, for example, what you look at is kind of the life cycle costs of your projects and your avoided damages. And so if you are more susceptible to flooding, meaning that it will happen more regularly, you're going to experience more damage, and then therefore your project has a better cost benefit compared to something that won't happen as often. So I think the grants and the funders do care about that, and you can demonstrate the urgency, mathematically, basically.
And I think too, there's also more. I don't have the perfect view of the funding for all this stuff out there in the world, but I know that there's certainly more dollars going towards the nature-based and the habitat and the restoration type projects, retreat, that sort of thing. So in areas where we have those opportunities, there's definitely dollars out there for those. When it gets into the more like hardened protection, there's less dollars out there in general. That's not a perfect black and white statement, but generally speaking, that seems to be the case.
Any further questions? No? Well, this is a report, and we generally don't take public comment on this. So thanks, everybody, for listening. And we will move on to our next report, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan Update with Human Resource Senior Analyst Henriksen.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Sarah Henriksen, and I work in the city's Human Resources Department as an analyst. And we really appreciate the opportunity that we have tonight to present a report to you on how the city's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program has been progressing since it started in 2019. I have been working in direct support of this program since it started, along with my director, Will Folger, and in partnership with the City Manager's Office. I am joined tonight by our consultants, Fog Break Justice, or at least 2 out of the 3 consultants that make up Fog Break Justice, Shanti Bryan and Burkay Brown. And they are going to be presenting the report to you guys tonight on how they have developed a plan for the city to incorporate more diversity and equity into our workforce and into the community at large, based initially on largely participated in employee survey, an internal employee survey that was conducted in the spring of 2020, as well as some information that was gathered through direct touch points that they had with representatives from certain community-based organizations. And that was all done just to really gather a sense of what the state of diversity was in our community and workforce at that time, and to really gather a better sense of the perception of inclusion in our community and equitable practices and opportunities that were available and things that weren't available, so we would know where to start in our plan and how we would continue to grow within that plan to achieve our common goals. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our consultants at Fogbreak Justice to present an update on their plan, kind of talk a little bit about what we've been doing so far to engage the city's workforce and the community in these efforts, and how this plan will continue to evolve over time. Shanti and Burkay.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Human Resources Analyst Henriksen. You've been a support in such a big way for the work that we're doing. We've been very excited to kind of share and report. City Manager Miles Slattery, thank you so much for just kind of creating the space for us to be able to engage in something that matters. Matters to us in a huge way. And so, Mayor, City Council members, what we care about is being able to share what we've done, where we are, and where we're going. And this is an opportunity for us to provide that information and to continue this work that is an ongoing work and that matters in such a big way. So we're happy to kind of go forward. Is there a click? Okay, beautiful. Oh, yes. I speak, so this is my place. So what I want to do is just provide a little roadmap for what we're going to be doing today. We want to reintroduce who we are as Fogbreak, give you an overview of the project, summary of the phases that were accomplished, and also the narrative as to why we're doing it, and why that process is important, and then provide some next steps.
Good evening. I'm Shanti Bryan. Who is Fogbreak? We've been here before, but there's new council members, so just wanted to give you a brief introduction of who we are. Along with Burkay and I, we have a partner, Christy Chandler. Christy and I are attorneys, and we have a legal background, specifically in criminal justice. We're also educators. Before we started Fogbreak about 9 years ago, we started mostly educating police, but really quickly grew into a consulting and education practice for municipalities, a lot of criminal justice agencies, and mostly government agencies that are interested in equity. And that's us. And quick project overview. The first phase is the discovery phase, where, like Sarah said, we were doing information gathering and sort of creating a baseline. And we had an initial report there. The foundation phase is mission, vision, and values. And that's Burkay's expertise is in organizational change. That's what he focuses on. And then we did an education phase with many workshops in different topic areas. And then finally, we're entering the implementation phase, where we'll be transitioning into more self-guided, internally guided learning, more outwardly focused, so community leadership meetings, really engaging with the community to see how we can build equity and inclusion in the larger community. Phase one, this is a summary of what we did. Our goals were really to start strengthening the connection, feelings of inclusion and belonging within the city employees. Just starting to sort of introduce these ideas of equity and inclusion and gain support around working toward those. We were listening to leaders, rising leaders, and honestly, anyone that would talk to us and wanted to share their experience. We were just gathering some baseline information. We did a kickoff meeting, we did listening sessions and interviews, and we did an employee equity and inclusion survey. This is us during COVID having a session at the Adorney Center, socially distanced. Our kickoff was in August of 2020. We had 5 key findings coming out of that phase. The first was most respondents, most city employees felt proud to work for the city and feel that there's a genuine effort toward diversity and inclusion. There is or was a need for a unifying vision around equity and inclusion, championed by leadership in word and deed. There were strong indicators of an in-group, out-group dynamic, and respondents described favoritism in the form of sort of an old boys network or kind of who you know. The city has had work to do to reach out and to build trust with people of color who work for the city. And finally, there was a need for protocols for addressing and confronting explicit racism and for building bridges with the marginalized communities in the greater community of Eureka. I guess this is to just emphasize that this need for a unifying vision around equity and inclusion was directly responded to in phase 2 of the project, which were the foundation phase. And Burke is going to tell you about what we did there.
So the process that we took for phase 2, in May 7, we introduced the Vision, Values, and Mission virtual session. We had 100+ employees that were there. On the 21st, we had a follow-up virtual leadership session. This was with the department heads. This lasted over 3 hours. And so ultimately, the goal is to get everybody involved in the process. This is not something that we just want to be top down. We want everybody to be engaged and getting clear on why are we here, what are we doing, what does it look like, and how do we articulate it. And so in that first session, we were able to gather everybody's input and then from there be able to clarify and crystallize exactly what it is that we want to have as our vision, our mission, and our values. July 21st, we did the crystallization with the city manager, human resources, and then we had the city council report September 7th, and then we did the department mission statement and leadership education sessions. So the goals: strengthen connection between coworkers. We wanted everybody to not only, it's easy to get stuck in your lane, it's easy to do the work that you do, but the more communication, the more people are able to engage and find out what they value, why they are a part of the city, why they do this work, it creates a stronger bond, which makes it that much easier for us to start to focus on what we're trying to create. Crystallize those shared values and define them. The more that something is defined, the more it kind of starts to become a part of the vernacular that everyone's using. And when that continuity comes together, it creates a lot more momentum. Creating a captivating vision statement, a purposeful mission statement, discovering how mission, vision, values are used in the workplace. So it's not banal platitudes. What we want to make sure is that this is something that is tied to us as individuals. And then we remember, oh, I was there when we all discovered what we cared about, right? That means that everybody they have investment in it. It's not something that's coming from the top down. And then ultimately gaining clarity regarding those missions, values to structure and execute. So here's a little video that we want to share. While we were doing the vision and values work, we had everybody come together and really find out what their own internal values are, because a lot of my research was on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. How do you empower people to be empowered to move towards a common goal? The first thing you have to do is find out what the natural drivers are of the individual. And so as they share their values, we start to see where they come together. And when you see where they come together, that in essence is showing the values of the city as the city staff as a whole. And then how do we look through that lens in order to attack and really execute the vision that we do have? And so here's a little clip of our process of pulling the values together. Whoever wants to unmute, go ahead and unmute and share. These are the 3 values that we have come up with. We're going to put them on the wall here, and we're going to see if there's any things that merge together and start to begin themes for the organizational values that are shared. So we got a lot of raised hands. Who wants to go first and share the 3 values that your team, your group has put together?
Okay, so we narrowed ours down between the 4 of us to equality, respect, and wisdom.
Community service, family, and integrity.
Our group came up with equity, equality, growth, and service.
Our group came up with, we had to kind of combine some terms here and create maybe some new words, but interconnectedness, commitment, and justice.
Beautiful. It's so good to see how these things are created. Interconnected wasn't even a word, but then birthed from these other values, you're like, what is it that ties it all together? All right, let's have another group share.
We have honesty, teamwork, and wisdom.
Okay, so for us, we had friendship,
excellence, and personal knowledge.
We had integrity, service, and security.
I can go. Our group had community, personal development, and fun.
We had caring, ethical practice, and influencing others.
My group had quality relationships, inner harmony, and independence.
Integrity, equality, and community.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Everybody, thank you so much for sharing. Give yourself some snaps on that. We see a lot around community, around family, a lot around equality, equity, justice, integrity. And when you think about diversity and you think about inclusion, these things are a part of it. Our own natural values, what we say that we care about, is a part of creating a sense of belonging. It's about engaging. It's about letting people feel that togetherness. We have wisdom, personal growth, inner harmony. We see how this kind of desire to develop ourselves. This is how we start to see what is common among us. This is how values are created, because why try to create values that are not your own in an organization when you already have your own internal drivers that we're all about already that can drive us forward? How do we use these values that are starting to clarify in a way to motivate action? And what we're going to do as time goes by is the leadership is going to work together to say, okay, how do we put this together into a clean understanding of what this value means to us? Excellent. And there's so much value to this type of work, and understanding that if we start at that point and then build upon it, we've set a foundation. And that's why we call this portion foundations, because then we can always go back to remember why we said what we did, why it matters to us. And so when we want to execute, we can then tie to that common language. And so as we put that all together, what we ultimately were able to create were our vision statement. And sir, we'll let you go ahead and read this vision statement.
We envision an inclusive community where everyone's fundamental needs are met, where our employees respect and celebrate all walks of life, where everyone can grow and thrive as we work with integrity for the good of Eureka.
Beautiful. And what's so great about this is the entire city staff came together, and we had multiple versions of different visions that were created, and people were able to vote on what they cared about and why. So this is not just words. There's so much involved in it, and that's what brings it to life. And that really sets the stage for what we will be doing in the next phase. But we'll also take some time to look at the values. Sarah, if you could please share.
Community, a sense of togetherness founded on respect, mutual support, and kindness with awareness of privilege, power, and position. Equity, recognition and celebration of individuality with inclusion and impartiality as the standard. Growth, forward momentum that maximizes opportunity for people to reach their potential. Integrity, quality character and courageous action with a unified commitment to principles, honesty, and transparency. Service, a steadfast commitment to improving conditions for others.
Excellent. And so by cultivating everyone's individual values and then moving them to something that we can crystallize, that just creates, again, more momentum. And when you look at a dictionary, you find the word provides a definition, and then how to use it in a sentence. And that's pretty much the same process that we're taking. This is the word, this is the definition, and then what does it look like in the real world, right? How do you make it something that is tied to the actions that you're doing in your community? And so if we can take a second to read the mission statement.
To meet the needs of Eureka residents, businesses, and visitors by providing services and making decisions that are socially, fiscally, and environmentally responsible, creating a workplace that values growth, inclusion, and empathy for all.
Excellent. Thank you. So what I want to share real quick is the positive tension model. And the way this works is the first thing that we want to do is understand the current reality. If I'm going into a mall, I need 2 bits of information. I need to know where I'm going in the mall, and then I need the "You Are Here" sign. Without those bits of information, I can't get to where I need to be. And in the same way, us in the discovery phase 1 was understanding what is the current reality? Where are things at? What's the data? And then what's the vision? What does it look like? What motivates you? What inspires you to act? That's phase 2. And what I want you to kind of see is that imagine a rubber band around both of those. What happens is there's something called positive tension that occurs because they want to be pulled together. And so that tension is kind of the space that we're at right now, where we're moving into phase 3. How do you integrate that into what it looks like in the city, in the community? What does it look like in terms of education? And so we'll talk about phase 3, that process where that positive tension model pulls things, the current reality, towards the vision.
You're going to click me. And so then we moved into phase 3, which is our education phase. We had several goals in this phase, particularly to promote the values of community, getting together and creating and getting to know our colleagues, equity and growth. We defined terms, we did education, we especially focused on tools, strategies, and skills to be implemented in the workplace. And we were specifically meeting the challenges around fairness and inclusion that came up in discovery phase. The process was basically 6 interactive educational workshops that we led between the end of 21, and we actually did the last one of those this morning. And also we had interspersed in those 3 informal discussions led by internal staff. These were the sessions we had: Equity 101, difficult conversations, procedural justice and implicit bias, which we had 2 sessions in person here. We had a specific session for police to really engage the police department in the project. Race and racial equity, those were both co-facilitated with someone from the police department. Fairness in hiring, interviewing, and evaluation, and privilege and allyship is what we did this morning. And then 3 informal discussion sessions, all relating back and integrating what people have learned in those other sessions. This is just a snapshot of some of the sessions. They're interactive. People are doing a lot of talking. It's a lot. There's a lot of valuable information and perspectives within the city staff. I mean, it's not just us giving out information. It's a lot of self-guided learning. We like to think it's sometimes fun. And this is an example, a couple pictures from the police listening session that went really well. We were happy with that. And I just wanted to point out that this finding from phase 1, the issue with the in-group, out-group dynamic and the sort of favoritism, who you know, we think was addressed somewhat by just getting together and getting to know other people throughout the city. Really, we're very intentional about commingling different departments and having people branch out and get to know people that they don't otherwise know. This was also just addressed a little more specifically in the fairness in hiring and evaluation session, how to address this kind of in-group, out-group dynamic. And then reaching out and building trust with people of color who work for the city was also addressed through all the education on race, racial equity, increasing fairness, reducing implicit bias. And I think that this goal or this issue has been addressed and will continue to be addressed by the ongoing commitment to the program, the ongoing commitment of the leaders to just keep this going. It's a sustained commitment, and that's how you build trust with people, is showing them that you're going to be here day in and day out working to address the issues. And so phase 4 is what we are in right now. And I'll just go ahead and briefly, it's just 2 slides. So phase 4 goals is finishing the educational sessions that we are gradually now going to be transitioning to more internally led sessions. we are going to, in this phase, we develop a comprehensive report of the whole program, and then we begin to turn outward to the larger community and engage with community leaders and others in the community that are working on equity issues. So yesterday, we gathered with community leaders in what was called a leadership summit to start this process and see who in the larger community would like to collaborate on this with us. We will be compiling the final report, and like I said, we'll be transitioning to more internal-led education sessions in the coming months and years. This is our picture of the leadership summit yesterday. It was a selfie, is why Burkay is right there in front. It was really a positive experience. The people that attended, it was a lot of education leaders. So Cal Poly Humboldt, Eureka City Schools, the County Department of Education, Equity Arcata. Is that the name of the organization? Yeah, Equity Arcata, and some Latinx community organizations were represented. And everyone was very excited to be invited, very encouraging about developing this, a cohort of leaders in this area that can work together. So we were very happy with that. And that is it. Next steps are the final report where we describe the whole program. We analyze the data and provide as much data and feedback as we can on the results. But it's a continued, the program's not over. They will be continued opportunities for learning. We're talking about quarterly educational events, and then ongoing consultation to support the city in increasing the participation of the community-wide leaders, and then support in implementing recommendations for moving forward. And we're open for questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Councilmember Fernandez.
Yeah, I appreciate the report that you've put together and the fact that you explicitly said that you focused on two types of motivation there, because that's how you create that spark of change too, not just internally, but looking for those external motivators as well. And so I have two questions that go to the specific challenges about fairness and inclusion. And so what was it that you found? Was it that good old boys network? Was it the favoritism? What was it specifically about those challenges?
Can you ask the question again? Yeah. What specifically?
What challenges were there about fairness and inclusion?
Well, the challenge specifically, and we collected a lot of data, so that's sort of a high-level summary of one of the challenges. There was just feedback, anecdotal feedback, that there's this sense of like there's an in-group and then there's sort of the out-group, and that maybe we're favoring kind of the old boys, and that actually means different things to different people. Maybe people who have lived in Eureka a long time, maybe people who have worked for the city a long time, sort of maybe a nepotism sometimes issue. So that was one of the things that came out, and really the whole program is to address, is to create inclusion and belonging. You have to have a sense of inclusion and belonging even before you try to make your workplace more diverse. Because if you diversify your workplace, there has to be a really welcoming and inclusive environment for them to come to. So really the entire program is about addressing a sense of belonging for people.
And it seems like you highlighted that too, at least that the employees felt that way in terms of wanting to build that or foment that inclusivity.
Yeah, there was a real yearning for kind of a vision of what that would be like to have a really inclusive community, and we've worked the people in the city have worked very hard to do that, and have come to all these events and have participated and really put their all into it. I mean, we're really impressed with the level of dedication from a lot of people.
And so I'm not sure if this is part of next steps going forward, but it said one of the last points, creating protocols or some sort of protocols for addressing racism internally and in our community. And so I was wondering if you identified any of those or if that was something you'd be recommending next in ongoing consultation.
Yeah, that's something that we will have recommendations in the final report. And really, that's something that the community leaders, as they continue and regularly meet, which it seems like they want to do, will develop. That should come from the community itself. So that's a charge for that group.
And so is that something that might continue going forward then?
Yes,
Is that
of
sort
course.
of diversity council? Well, will it be that? That's what I'm trying to figure out here.
So I think one of our recommendations is probably going to be a diversity, equity, inclusion council internally, and they can partner with and work with what maybe we don't have a name for it yet, but like this leadership summit that was called last night, there was a lot of interest and engagement, and I hope, and the Human Rights Commission, I forgot to say, was represented there too. So we're hoping that turns into a really robust area of ideas and programs and collaborations for moving this work out into the larger community and addressing some of those more. That issue was specifically kind of more in the general community than within the city staff.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
And I'll just add to that we do have DEI coordinators for each one of our departments that were established as part of this process. And it would be great if council could reach out to some of the community-based organizations and request participation. The more the merrier. I would have liked to have seen a lot more participation in the Leadership Summit yesterday, and we do intend on continuing to do that at a minimum on an annual basis and hopefully develop more programs from that. But it would be nice to see a lot more community-based organizations involved with this. We did have a couple people that couldn't have made it that intended to, but I'd still like to see more participation from more diverse groups.
And I can add that the more that these conversations are happening, and in the conversation we were talking about what the specific priorities are. What's most important to you right now, and where can the city be a support for you? And you could see eyes light up in that conversation because all of a sudden ideas started to happen and people started to have an understanding of what everyone's focusing on. And so just as Miles was saying, to be able to have more individuals experience it really is what builds that momentum in a big way.
Councilmember Castellano.
Yeah, thanks for the report and for the questions. I was curious if the Leadership Summit group, if there's anything they're particularly excited about or concerned about that kind of rose to the surface last night. I know you're gonna kind of call it into a report, but just was there anything that kind of stood out?
I would say the vision that was translated, the work that has been done, and they've seen what's been happening with the city staff over this much time, and to see it presented in a concise way, and then also a desire, what everybody was saying was more communication like this. That was by far the most. One of them said, I wish we did this 10 years ago, right? And they say the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. And really, the more that these conversations are happening and the more that we have an articulated language that everyone can coalesce around, that's where the momentum will pick itself up. It's just the nature of humanity. Our own ability to self-determine is based on us having a common language and a common vision.
I would agree that the communication is what they all want. I mean, almost everyone wanted more regular meetings, more knowledge about others' priorities, more interaction with city leaders about what was happening internally. People wanted help getting out the word about their events and priorities, so helping each other, communicate out what they were doing. So it really was a lot about communication.
Great. And then I was just going to say, y'all are probably aware that, Eureka has a cultural arts district, which, has a diverse group of community leaders that convene to plan around that. And one of the kind of needs and interests or two of the needs and interests that have really risen to the top has been just greater representation, like in and around the cultural arts district, and then also representation, visibility, and then capacity to kind of like share stories and exchange stories and really have everybody's stories of multicultural stories of people in Eureka part of the public discourse.
Well, like Miles said, we would love and welcome your help in getting community leaders to attend the next Leadership Summit, because it was great. I think they think it's going to be such a drag, and really it was a very optimistic and positive experience. We're hoping the word gets out from the participants, but we could also use your help. We know that there are a lot of important projects happening and important leaders doing great things in the community, and to get them all together, we do need a little bit more support in that.
Councilmember Moulton.
I didn't have a question. First, thank you for the presentation and for all the work you've helped make happen here. Just wanted to say that I really appreciate how empowering this process has been, how it's all about us and what we see and what we want, and us writing our own mission, and there's not this top-down sort of feeding of information. And I think that really gives people a sense of ownership. And I just wanted to sing the praises of the folks who are doing the work inside of the city. I watched Will Folger's eyes get really big. He's very excited to basically have permission to take this ball and run with it. And it's great to see folks who want to do this kind of work being able to really dig into it, and just engaging with y'all has helped make that a top priority for a lot of people. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate
you.
that.
Anything further? Okay, seeing no further questions, we will now open it up to public comment. So if anybody thank you.
Okay.
If anybody from the public would like to comment on this, come on up. Is there anybody on Zoom? No? Okay. Any final comments? No? I have one. I just want to thank you both for your dedication and hard work on this. I think these kinds of things really do move mountains, and they start real small, but they tend to grow and to foster into this really great thing. And I'm so appreciative that this is happening in our community. It's so past necessary. So really appreciation. Thank you. All right, so moving on, we have, before we do that, I wanted to let you know that I do have the information on the community info session. It's happening tomorrow night with Link. And so I just wanted to say that. I'll post it on my Facebook page, and they'll be all over the place. And I'll probably report it again during announcements, just for fun. That being said, let's move on to Eddie Alexander's marketing presentation with Jennifer Eddy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be back in front of you. Oh, it just plugs in. Do you have my computer? No. Sounds like we have a computer issue. Please hold. Very nice to see you guys. And for those of you that are new on council, very nice to be in front of you for the first time this evening. That's okay. I appreciate it. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Are you? I emailed it in. Is it possible to log in?
One moment.
No, just the deck.
So I think as they're figuring this out, we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. And so we will move forward with a presentation by Jennifer Eddy from Eddy Alexander.
Thank you all for your patience. I really appreciate it. I think they're logging back in here. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you guys so much for having me in and for your patience as we got the slides up and running tonight. Many of you I've had the chance to present before to some of you. This will be the first time. So please bear with me because I did try and take a step back and sort of lay the groundwork of what we were hired to do and what we've been up to the last couple of years and then what we're focused on now today. I do have some stats to share with you. That's sort of become a calling card. We're very data driven at Eddy Alexander and there's some great stories to share about how things have been going. So I'm looking forward to doing that today. If you'll jump to the third slide, then we can jump right in. Okay, so when we were hired back in 2019, Eddy Alexander was tasked with 3 goals to support the City of Eureka's tourism and communications programs. The first and primary objective was to develop some city-centric branding, something that could unify the vision and the communications coming forth from the city out into the world. That included going out to tourism, to visitors to this beautiful place, and also to the citizens themselves to kind of share the story of quality of life and why it's so great to live and work and play here in Eureka. So we've been focused on all 3 things, and every couple of months I come in and give an update on what we've been doing and how it's been going. And oftentimes our data centers around that tourism marketing. You know, how many clicks and how many visitors to the website and what does that mean in terms of TOT tax dollars and all of that sort of thing. Tonight, I also have some data to share around a way we were able to measure quality of life promotion and improvement. So I'm super excited to share that with you guys today. So we'll just jump right in. So according to these 3 goals, the primary initiative was branding. We tackled that in year 1. Actually, you were right on the right. Thank you. So in year 1, we worked on a comprehensive community-led branding effort. So this started with a lot of research about the community and what they prioritize, how they felt about this place, and what they thought the values were that they wanted communicated and shared out into the world. And then, the pandemic hit, so we had a little slight delay, and then we were able to launch into the world. That brand continues to grow and evolve and be placed into more and more places throughout the community. It's always really fun to come out and see how it's just grown and kind of become its own thing, and all the different places it shows up. So, from the banners along the 101 to the new visitor center downtown, the recent city website refresh, which I know we're going to get some updates on and I think is lovely a little bit later. All of that kind of has aligned to being able to use that toolkit to tell a story in a really consistent way. That was recognized by the state of California last year with a Poppy Award for the branding work and for destination branding. And then the citywide brand training we did at initial launch, we are now about to redo because the city has grown and there's more staff that have not been exposed to that training yet. So we're going to do another round of that on Thursday that will be open to all city staff, and we're hoping that we'll get some more people involved in helping share those communication messages out. So the branding is going well. Then when we move into marketing, there's a number of initiatives that we kind of undertake under the umbrella of tourism marketing. So we work with the media on a very regular basis. That's media relations, traditional journalism, as well as travel writers and travel journalism. It's community relations, outreach, and communications about what's happening within the city, going out to our local community and our neighbors close and far away. And then influencer engagement, social media icons and travel writers and bloggers and things like that, who are hosting them and bringing them into town and showing them everything Eureka has to offer so that they're going out and showing that same face to the world. Then from an advertising perspective, we have a pretty comprehensive integrated program that includes print, broadcast, digital, and social outreach, and of course the website as well. And then from an events perspective, there's a number of fabulous community events already here, so we're doing everything we can to promote those activities. And more recently, we've started developing some custom events as well that have really strategic initiatives designed to help even out the visitation and the seasonality of visitation in the region. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things we'll be doing just in this upcoming weekend related to one of those events. And then partnerships, working with local, regional, statewide, and corporate sponsors on different initiatives and programs. For instance, right now we have an influencer coming in on Thursday and staying through the weekend. It's a travel writer that's being sponsored by Avello that's coming into town, and then once they get her here on the flight, we're taking her and running around the city, her and her 2 kids, and hopefully she'll take that message back to LA and write about it and share it with lots of other folks. So we're finding unique ways to partner in those scenarios as well. Down on the bottom here are some mock brochures. We're in the process of working with the new visitor center team to develop a series of kind of matching branded materials that will tell the story about what Eureka has to offer to various groups that are interested in particular itineraries. So you'll see there's a brochure for outdoor recreation, one for dog-friendly Eureka and places people can go if they are traveling with their pets, history and architecture, music and festivals, family attractions, and cannabis experiences. So this is what I'm most excited to share with you guys, not particularly this slide, but the next one. 3 years ago when we first came in, we did a big comprehensive survey. We reached out to every business owner and every resident in the community and invited them to participate in a survey. We had thousands of people respond. And one of the questions that was embedded in that survey was, how likely are you to recommend a visit to the city of Eureka to a friend or colleague? You all may have remembered this. There were some negative headlines at the time about the community having a morale problem, that there wasn't a lot of kind of ambassadorship of the community. And this happens a lot, actually. But we sort of took this as a goal that, if we were going to do great things for tourism, that the locals had to believe in the story that was being shared. It had to be authentic, it had to be true. So we had an opportunity just a couple of months ago. After the Sarah Bareilles concert, we had a list of several thousand people that had come to that concert that we could reach out to. And we asked them a bunch of questions about how that event went, feedback on everything from parking to food availability. And we sort of wove this question right in the middle of it just to see if we had made any progress. And I'm very pleased. Well, first, let me take a moment to kind of explain how the Net Promoter Score works. It's a scale of 1 to 10. If you are a 5, 6, 7, you'd think that would be positive. It is, but it's neutral positive. We don't count that as a positive score. We want 8, 9s, and 10s. Those are people who are passionate enough about their community to be advocating for their community. They're outspoken, they're influencing other folks. And so that's really what we want to measure. This same technique is used for brands, it's used for governments, it's used for all different organizations to sort of measure pride in place, right? And so we are using this. We did this survey just a couple of months ago. We had over 1,000 respondents to that kind of mini survey that we did just a few months ago. So still very statistically significant. And you'll see our score jumped from negative 18.56 to positive 20 is a 208% increase in how people feel about their community. I think that's a pretty amazing stat. And so I know there's been a lot of work over the last couple of years by a lot of different people from all sorts of different organizations, from many of you that are on the board, certainly, but from all kinds of people in the community who are doing all kinds of great work. And I think that collective energy and that collective effort has really led to a pretty phenomenal turnaround in terms of kind of ambassadorship of the community out into the world. So I was really excited to come back and share that with you tonight. So a little bit more in the details. I also wanted to give you some updates on how the digital ad campaigns are going. Often we come in and we talk about cell phone data and visitor traffic trends around the city, and we'll do that probably in the next visit that I come back for. But I wanted to go into our digital ad campaign as well, because these run on a regular basis throughout the state of California, and they run in various other feeder markets in other locations as well, kind of known places that people are coming from to visit the city. So in the last year, we really matured that branding program. So we're running the same ads we started when we launched the brand a little over 2 years ago. We're still using the real, authentic, different taglines and the cultural differentiation positioning strategy. But in the last year, we sort of split that budget, and we took part of it to continue running this ad campaign. It was performing well, and we wanted to keep it out there. And we wanted to continue telling stories around history and architecture, art and culture, and outdoor recreation as sort of our three leaders in our messaging pillars. But in the last year, we also kind of reserved some of that budget to partner with community organizations to help promote the events that were coming back post-COVID. It was a little bit of an experiment because we didn't know whether we were going to lose some traction here in terms of exposure, or whether we were going to be able to kind of get an upsweep of differentiation and lower our costs and be able to get more exposure. That ended up being a huge success. Not only did we get to partner with more organizations in the community than we had ever done before, we also saw the results in the data itself. So in the last year, there were over 24 million impressions for the Eureka ads just in the digital platforms alone. That's not including Redwood Skywalk ads. That's just these City of Eureka ads. And for each of these, there's like 5 or 10 different sizes of each of them with different art as well. So lots of different ads that are out there running. But of those, it drove ad-based website visits up another 678% year over year. We attribute that to some real differentiation in the market. So what's happened over the last year is a lot of ARPA funds have flown to every community. Post-COVID, different states have handled how that works differently, but in many states, a portion of that has been dedicated, had to go towards tourism and helping rebound the local businesses in their tourism districts. And because of that, you have more people advertising in the tourism space than ever before. In these auction-based digital models, that means everybody's driving the cost of everybody else up because all the funds have to be used by the same time frame, so everyone's kind of trying to use them at the same time. So by kind of pulling apart how we advertised, we were able to drive down the cost. Good thing. Usually we want our numbers to go up, but those numbers we want to go down. And then we were able to drive our click rates up because we had a different kind of message that was much more nuanced, much more authentic, much more real than a lot of folks who were just saying visit insert city name here. So that was particularly successful. We also noticed some interesting trends over the last year in terms of the different kinds of ads that we had running. So again, we have outdoor recreation, we have history and architecture, and we have arts and culture, and then each of those have sort of a set of ads underneath them. And we track not only how they're doing collectively, but how they're doing individually and what the cost rates are for each, because again, it's an auction model. One of the things we found is outdoor recreation. We all know people love to come to this area. You want to see the trees and the beaches and all the beauty. But they're the most expensive ads. And they are the most expensive ads because everyone else is trying to tell their story about outdoor recreation following the pandemic as well. They're getting about half as many clicks and impressions for the spend. So if we put the same amount of money into each one, you're getting less, it's going less far. That said, the arts and architecture is getting the most clicks. We're getting the most traction and the most interest out of that. But history and architecture is getting the most clicks, but arts and culture is getting the best value. So for the money, you're getting the most exposure and the most engagement with prospective audiences. What that says to us is that this three-pronged approach of telling Eureka's story is working particularly well, that we're getting all of these different things and we're getting to balance them. It's keeping our costs down and it's allowing us to reach millions of people with Eureka's story, which is hopefully driving folks in to spend money in our shops and help our businesses thrive. So we're pretty excited about that. So what that breaks down into in terms of monthly traffic is an average of 2.7 million impressions per month. So the number of people who see those ads in our target markets. We target these based on the known zip codes that drove the most traffic the year before. So every year we do a cell phone analysis and we look at where people are coming from when they're visiting Eureka, and then we target those areas plus a 30 to 60 mile radius around there so that we can advertise in places where we're getting traction and build on that momentum rather than just going into kind of a white space area and trying to build momentum from the ground up. We're averaging about 7,000 to 8,000 clicks per month on our ads. Those are the traffic that's coming to the ads, coming to the website just from the ads. We also have organic and direct traffic coming to the websites as well. And then the arts and culture and architecture ads are driving the most traffic to the website respectively this year, a little different than the year before where it was more of the outdoor recreation. Again, some of those market factors are why that's happening. Then the average cost per click is coming back down. It was a little bit higher over the holiday season. Again, it's an auction model and lots of people advertise in the Christmas season. So we're glad to see that coming back down. So we are also running a separate campaign specifically to drive traffic and visitation to the Redwood Skywalk. This was part of the original launch strategy and something we've been continuing to do since October of 2021. That campaign is getting about almost 5 million impressions monthly. It's driving about 21 to 22,000 clicks to redwoodskywalk.com monthly. And over the last year, we've had over 275,000 people watch the promotional video for the Redwood Skywalk, and 255,000 of those are directly from the ad campaign. And then interestingly, this one, we have some different ad groups. So we have like a peace and tranquility campaign. We have a thrills and adventure campaign, and we have a retiree focused campaign. So the pictures are a little different, the messaging is a little different, and the targeting is a little different in terms of who we're showing those ads to. So we're also tracking which ads are performing the best there. In this particular season, the retiree focused ad group was the most likely to be clicked with the highest click-through rate, and the peace and tranquility ads have driven the most traffic to the website overall. It's an interesting data point for me because when the Skywalk was being planned and before it opened, we had a lot of conversations about is this a peaceful, recreational, outdoor, educational experience, or is this a high in the sky adventure experience? And I think we're seeing that the positioning that was selected is working. It's working. It's reaching the right people at the right time. So that's pretty exciting. So in terms of our numbers for last year, we did pretty well. We didn't do quite as well as we did the year before in terms of total occupancy. A lot of that is based on some of the impact we had on travel as it related to gas prices, and then the pilot shortage also hurt us quite significantly. So at the beginning of the year last year, we had pretty significant increases in air travel to the area, and then by summer they were pulling back because of the pilot shortages. And then over the course of the summer, gas prices kept going up, and people were canceling road trip vacations, which is where a lot of your visitation typically comes from. That's the bad news. The good news is that your average daily rate for your local hotels and your revenue per available room soared. So that tells me two things. It means that your brand is working. People are willing to pay more to come here and to stay than they were 2-3 years ago. So we're comparing most of these numbers to pre-pandemic numbers because there were some anomalies in the market over the last couple of years. But we do have 2019 through 2022 here. So you can see that our occupancy was down a little bit, not a lot over last year. but still higher than, in the doldrums of the pandemic. But our average daily rate continues to grow. That's making up for some of the losses in occupancy and helping make sure that that overall revenue that's coming in just through the hotels is doing pretty well. This is a pretty good indicator of how you're going to end up with your TOT taxes by the end of the year. And it should be somewhat reflective, sort of an indicator of how your local businesses will be performing year over year. So we want to continue to drive up that occupancy, because if we can maintain that ADR, average daily rate, and that revenue per available room, and we can drive that occupancy up at the same time, we'll get people who will stay longer, spend more money, and have more economic impact. That's great for them. I'm glad they had a great vacation, but ultimately that's not what tourism investing is about for communities. It's really about leveraging that money they leave behind to put into the programs and services you need to do things like perhaps move a critical piece of infrastructure in the future. So all of these things ultimately are a lot of fun to talk about, but they drive real business results and business opportunities for communities who have mission-driven purposes. So that's what we're focused on. So in terms of new events, we have a first ever Hearts by the Sea festival this weekend. It will be Friday and Saturday, February 10th and 11th. I provided a flyer for each of you guys. These are also available all throughout downtown. I'm really excited about this event. Kayla Corder, who is our new community senior marketing executive here in Eureka, has been leading the charge on this effort and has done a great job getting a bunch of people involved in the program. So when I originally went to her with this idea, I said, hey, we really want to rent the Eureka Theater and show some romantic movies for free. We just want everyone to be able to come out and participate and watch some romantic movies if they want to right before Valentine's Day. And she took this idea and really ran with it, reached out to Eureka Main Street and lots of other organizations throughout the community, lots of businesses, and said, well, what could you do? How could we build on this? And we've had, I think, 15 or 16, correct me if I'm wrong, but lots of different businesses come up with great ideas about how they could kind of build on this story about what Eureka has to offer that makes it such a lovely place. And we're going to have all kinds of things going on this weekend. So Friday night, we have When Harry Met Sally, free movie at the Eureka Theater. Saturday, we're showing Grease, Moulin Rouge, and The Notebook. So I hope everybody will come out. I hope everyone who's watching will come out. But there's lots of other things going on in town too. Many of the businesses along Main Street are offering specials in their store. They might be giving out chocolates or having discounts. One of the bookstores has a blind date with a book program going on. So you can go in and they've got kind of wrapped packages that you can choose from and plan to have an adventure that way. There's tea and tours at the Pink Lady. There's carriage rides. So some things that are always happening that make this place lovely, and then some things that are particularly special for the weekend before Valentine's Day. So we hope that this will become an annual event, and that this event will be something that people come from out of town to visit and participate in. We know that there's great seasonality in our travel and tourism kind of market and industry here in Eureka. And we know that February is a time where people are not usually filling the hotels. And so we wanted to add an event that would kind of take inspiration from all the amazing events that go throughout the summer and spring and fall seasons, and help kind of round out that tourism seasonality and support our local businesses at the same time. So I'm hoping to come back in front of you in a couple of weeks or months, as you will allow, and share a little bit more data about the traffic trends and what we're doing in terms of making sure that people are moving around and staying as long as they can in Eureka to get a great taste of the city while they're here, also to contribute to the economy in the ways that is really important and why we invest in tourism. And then at that time, I'm hoping to have Kayla also give out a bit of an update. She's going to the Visit California conference this year as well, the Marketing Outlook Forum, and I'm hoping she'll be able to share some news from that with you as well. So with that, I'll just open it up to any questions.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Jennifer? Anyone? Councilmember Moulton?
You talk about focusing on areas where our tourists are coming from. Can you give me an example? Where are people coming from?
Yeah, so we know, and I can share this because I'm going to be going a little bit from memory, but I can share it from our deck from last year. We always have people from Reading, from LA, from Denver, San Francisco sends quite a few folks, but it's not just the whole city, right? And so when we look at, well, we could advertise in LA because we know we have a lot of people that come up from LA every year. That's a very expensive proposition. But if we can say, hey, there's 2 zip codes in LA that bring 90% of the traffic that comes from LA up to us, then let's advertise in those districts and the surrounding census blocks, because those people who see those ads are more likely to turn to their friend and say, hey, have you heard of Eureka? Have you been? It looks like a cool place. And they're more likely to have somebody say, yes, yeah, it is. It's really cool. You should go visit. So you're getting more bang for that buck. And then as you grow that, you're growing it out little by little over time. By making the audience really tight like that as well, like a zip code or a mile from a specific destination, rather than trying to reach an entire MSA, you're also competing against fewer people for that audience in that auction model. So it becomes much, much less expensive to reach more people in the areas that are hotly contested. And so that's how we're using that data. But I couldn't rattle off the zip codes by heart. I will bring them back to you in the next one, because we're in the process of getting that cell phone data now for 2022. And then we'll update that. We do see it changes a little bit. Typically about 3 or 4 of the zip codes will shift from year to year. And we tend to target the top 20 zip codes from year to year.
One more question. You talk about obviously some great work raising Eureka's impression of itself. Could you give an example of one of the strategies or one of the campaigns that you've done?
Yeah, so a lot of it is partnering with the community and making sure that folks know all the great stuff that's happening. I think sometimes tourism programs are so focused on using limited dollars to get people to come in that they forget to share with the folks that can be ambassadors for all the stuff that's happening locally, and they want to participate too, right? So one of the great things that comes out of tourism is placemaking and events and quality of life activities that make you want to live here, makes you want to, stay here and play here and invite your friends from out of town here. That's a really important part of the tourism mix. So that's one of those initiatives. I think the Sarah Bareilles concert in the fall was a perfect example of something that really was designed for the community, but it brought folks from out of town too. And it left an impression in people's minds, both locally and from further away, about what a great community this was. The energy there was fabulous. And I think, that will be a hard one to repeat, I'm sure, year after year. But it's the same thing, kinetic sculpture race. It's the seeing yourself in National Geographic or American Way magazine, or, seeing the Skywalk featured in Condé Nast Traveler Spain, right? I think it just makes people look at their own community, where it's easy to take for granted what you see every day. You're looking through fresh eyes and going, why are these big important magazines taking us so seriously? Why are they so impressed with what we have to offer? And I think if people have a kind of negative perception, that fresh look through a new lens is what makes them go, oh, wait a minute, that's pretty darn cool. So I'd love to say it was a particular campaign that we ran, but I think it's a lot of collective efforts by a lot of people to make sure that it is a great community and that we focus our energy on the things that make it so great. So
thank you.
Anyone? Councilmember Fernandez.
Thank you. So my question, kind of going with what was just asked about how we view ourselves internally. And so I'm curious what the number of responses were in 2019 versus the more recent one.
So in 2019, I want to say it was over 2,500. I'm going from memory, but I could follow up with an email with the specific numbers. In this survey, it was over 1,000. Both are statistically significant. Those are huge response rates for this size community. But it was bigger in 2019 than it was in 2022.
And then you were saying that you use a list, or that you used a list of contacts from the Sarah Bareilles concert. Mm-hmm. So how long after the concert was the survey conducted?
It was about 4 weeks, if I remember correctly. It might have been 5 or 6,
okay.
But it was not direct. It wasn't like the day after or whatever.
Well, yeah, that's why I was curious. Like how how high of a positive were they flying on after that free concert?
The buzz might have come down a little bit, but it is a little bit of a biased list because it was people who just went to this great event that was very well received. So, you got to take that with a grain of salt. But a 208% increase, normally you would correct for that with like a 5, or really, if you were being aggressive, a 10% shift. You still came up with a 200% increase.
Right.
So if we have to settle for that, I'll take those odds.
And I appreciate you putting together the flyer too, because that's something that I get asked regularly by friends and constituents, is like, what's going on this weekend? What's going on next weekend? And it's like, well,
please direct them to visit eureka.com/events. We have put a lot of effort into making sure that events calendar is as robust as it can be. Likewise, if you have people who are planning events, please make sure they remember to let us know. There's a form there on that website where if somebody submits it's their event, we will get it right up onto the event calendar. And we're doing more and more to advertise in ways that direct people directly to that website, so that they're not necessarily coming in through the homepage, but they're going right to the events page to see what there is to see and do. And then the social media channels as well, on Facebook and Instagram, are also very popular and filled with event posts and blog posts about things that are going on seasonally as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'd rather steer them there than to any of the other outlying communities.
That said, some people will only follow you. And so if you wanted to repost any of this stuff, we would love that as well.
Send them to my mayor page. Anyone else? Not yet. Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. And we'll bring it back for public comment. So go ahead and have a seat if you'd like.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody from the public here to comment on this item? Anybody online?
Althea?
Yeah, so kind of on that last bit about, people knowing what events are happening. I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a little segment called What's Going On. It was just a couple minutes long, in which a presenter would, do a quick rundown of all the events that were happening that week or that weekend in kind of an amusing way. And I think that reached a lot of people. It would run on, I think it was channel 29 at that point. But I think that would reach a lot of people who don't necessarily use social media or don't use the internet, which there still are quite a few who don't. So I just wanted to suggest that.
Thank you. Do you see anybody else? I do not. And we'll bring it back to council for comments. Councilmember Contreras-Deloge.
Yeah, I just I wanted to compliment it. I think it's just very accessible and quaint and charming and lovely. So, and I definitely had noticed it, but I didn't know who was responsible for it and what was going on. And I think this definitely is working. I became more aware of what was going on in the city, but wasn't sure, how and why. So I really appreciate it. I think it's beautiful branding. It's really lovely. So.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Fernandez?
I'm not familiar with the old, I guess, mechanism. What's going on?
Oh,
and so
Joel Agnew.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not sure if that was done on radio or
It's
on TV.
Yeah. So I mean, is there some way to reintroduce something like similar to that? Was that something that was conducted by the city, or was that something done independently?
It was
Facebook
I
Live.
suppose I can answer that.
Okay.
Councilmember Fernandez offering his services to do that.
Well, as long as I'm not coughing up or sneezing, yeah, I have no problem putting the dulcet tones of my baritone tenor here out.
Okay.
I think it was a sponsored thing that happened on a privately owned television station. But something like that could happen in a different venue.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? No more baritones? Well, of course, I'll make my comment then. I'm still figuring out when I get to comment and when I don't, so I'm going to now. And I just want to say thank you so much. I remember being at those early meetings and just listening to the vitriol that was happening about our city and about just the people working on anything and everything. It wasn't the most beautiful time. And, just for every little detail makes a huge impact. And I love all the little details and nuances that happen with this campaign. And I don't understand how people don't understand and realize that we live in paradise. I don't get that. But, there are people out there with, attitudes, I suppose. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and continue to do. And I look forward to just moving Eureka forward as we have been. So much great stuff happening. Okay. Anyone else now? All right. Thank you so much, Jennifer. We're glad you're here. and your team. And I see Dan back there as well. Thank you. All right. Well, moving on to what do we have? 19 minutes before we have to extend the meeting. So we're going to go ahead and move it on to future agenda items. Is there anyone that has anything they wanted to bring forward? Not today? Okay. Then we will move on to city manager reports. City Manager Slattery.
Thank you, Mayor Brigel, and good evening again, Mayor and Council. Tonight we have in the audience, and our presenters for this evening are going to be our newly anointed social media coordinator, Hunter, and our administrative technician, Ross Mantle. Oh, assistant. We need to fix that, Suzanne.
Yeah,
anyway, they're going to be presenting on our newly developed long-term planning mission for the new webpage that we developed.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Assistant City Manager Powell isn't here because she put a lot of effort into this as well and spent a lot of long days doing this. But since then, Cozy and Suzanne have been doing a lot of hard work on this, and it's been very well received by staff and a lot more user-friendly for the public as well. So welcome.
And I just wanted to say, because I am chiming in, even though I'm not in chambers.
Hello, Pam Powell.
Pam. Hello. I'm so appreciative of Suzanne and Cozy. And anyway, they're going to give you a great explanation of our new website. And they've put so much effort into it. And I'm so appreciative. So anyway, hello.
Thank you, Pam. Hi, Mom. She's watching, so I just had to do a shout out real quick. So yeah, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Miles and Pam. We, back in 2021, had the opportunity to change the content management system that we use to host the city website. And when we noticed that opportunity was available to us, we realized there was kind of an opportunity to change the way we were doing the website. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the old website, but it was difficult to access, difficult to navigate, not very appealing to the eyes. There was just a lot going on with it that we thought, we can change this and hopefully improve the experience for the end user. So we wanted to design a person-centered approach for the city website moving forward when we had the opportunity to change the management system over. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about what we were thinking initially, how we planned it, the methodology for what we did here, the results, and then hopefully the next steps moving forward for our digital presence, because Eureka hasn't really had much of a digital presence so far, and we're kind of hoping to put it on the map in a positive way that brings civic engagement up and make sure people understand just what we do for them and what opportunities they have here. I kind of already introed this while we were figuring out the slides, but again, we started this plan in late 2021, and the content management system we ended up choosing was going to allow us to port a lot of our information. And so, sorry, I'm kind of nervous. Thank you. Yeah, we wanted to make some changes essentially, and I kind of already went over this, but can we go to the part where we divide it into threes? There we go. Here are the main goals that we had in mind when changing the content management system over. We wanted to make sure that it was accessible to the community, that all the information and the resources that the city provides was easily accessible to people. We didn't want it to be like buried in a PDF 5 clicks into the website. We also wanted the experience of the website to actually be enjoyable, hopefully nice to look at, easy to navigate, and just something that people easily could reference in their day-to-day lives. And through both of those, we wanted to increase civic engagement with the city and our resources and the information we can provide them. In comparing the old and the new, the old website, the main menu is organized surrounding the departments. It's not really organized around what's commonly accessible. They aren't available in an intuitive way or from the homepage. And there was no unity between the departments. All the departments were sort of isolated, separate things. There wasn't kind of like an overall universality to the website. It didn't show like, kind of a united vision. With the new website, we were trying to present that united vision kind of in line with the DE&I and the rebranding as well. We're hoping to pull elements from those other projects into the website redesign so that it would look like a unified effort was being made to present information and resources to the community in as easily accessible way as possible. And in doing that, we wanted to change the way that the main menu was organized. We wanted to change the organization around so that it was person-focused and it was centered with the citizens in mind rather than thinking inward out. We wanted outward in thinking. And all of this visioning is great, but we don't actually have a department dedicated to the web presence for the city at all. So this project actually came together with some help from between the IT personnel, department administrators, Allie Jones and her team, and all of it was overseen by Pam, the city clerk. So this was like a very collectivistic effort between multiple departments to get this off the ground. So the first step of the project was to gather the analytics and do some research. This was mainly looking at who comes to the website, what are they looking for. We used Google Analytics and we implemented a chatbot which would interface with people from the front page or from any page on the website, and people could ask it questions for what they were looking for, why they were there. And we used the information that we got from that to kind of redesign and rework the website as we were going through it. After we gathered analytics and did research on what new system we should use, we then ported and restructured information. That was a very long process. Initially, it seemed kind of straightforward, where we were just taking these pages and moving them to the new system. But after that, the department administrators, IT personnel, myself, Suzanne, and the city clerk went through and we reorganized all the information around that person-centered, easy navigation approach. This also included integrating new website tools that came with the CMS, as well as integrating Granicus and the agenda newsletter. The tools that allow us to distribute and create those things also needed to be integrated with the website. After that, the hope is that we continue analyzing our results and see how well we did and make adjustments accordingly via the same tools with the chatbot and Google Analytics, as well as tools that came with the new CMS, content management system. Allie Jones and her team joined the city initially very early during the visioning process, and they were instrumental in supporting the process throughout the porting of the pages and the redesign of the information. They gave us reorganizational tools, they helped lead some of the workshops, and they helped us talk through the revisioning and what we really wanted to see being presented with the content and the information. This is just sort of a schedule of events showing all the different things we did and the team and the timeline. Again, we have chatbot analytics, training. The training took up a very large portion of last summer, and all the different department admins took time out of their day to attend, sometimes 8-hour trainings on how to use the new CMS tools, and then change and reorganize the information relating to their departments so that we had this more unified and person-centered display of information on the website. So you can see it took just a little under a year, which I'm actually quite impressed with, given the nature of everything. All right. So it's really early days, but it looks great. We have some screenshots, and then we can also go to the website briefly, if you don't mind, Suzanne. We have the old website archived so that we can still click around on it and pull things as needed, although that will be leaving soon, but you can see the mega menu is organized very specifically by department. If I was a citizen and I wanted to pay my water bill or start water service or investigate about planning and zoning, I'm landing on this page, I wouldn't really know where to start. So that was kind of the main issue that we attempted to address with the redesign. And in the news site, it's very colorful. The first thing you see are kind of the most frequently asked questions, not frequently asked questions, but the biggest uses that people tend to get out of accessing the city website. They want to pay water bills, start service, watch these meetings, report information, jobs. So those are all at the top. We then have an upcoming events city calendar. All of the department's events actually populate to this main calendar, and then there's separate calendars per department page that sometimes host additional information there. We have the city newsletter, which you can sign up for it using that giant button. And then you can also report concerns, create an account with the website, or sign up for Notify Me. And Notify Me is a really fun feature of this content management system that allows you to sign up for newsletters relating to a variety of different topics in the city. So there's a lot of places we can go with that. After that, we have a news section. And then at the very bottom, we have agenda, meetings, and minutes. So that is all very exciting. The old site page view analytics, this is a 10-month overview. We had about 1,300 a day. I don't have data for the new site because it's only been a couple months, but this is sort of the comparison that we're looking for. We want to compare the data from the previous site or even from the last 3 months and project forward into how we want to change, reorganize, or how we can increase engagement with the site. And that sort of leads into the next steps here. Really, we want to anticipate and envision what the community needs from the city of Eureka having a digital presence, right? And a lot of that has so far been met in a sort of hodgepodge between Facebook or other social media platforms, the old website, but really all of the city information and resources should start with the website and then kind of branch out to social media platforms from there. So ideally, it would all be collected in one space, and then you would have kind of dissemination through the social media platforms. This way people would know there's a centrally located place for getting information about events or different opportunities and resources that the city offers. So when we're thinking about it, we need to ensure that we're able to analyze and understand how the end users are interacting with the web presence, as well as anticipate what they might need moving forward. And then from there, we need people who are in website or web administration roles to have the knowledge, time, and ability to kind of implement that knowledge and see it through. And this kind of goes back to the different tools that we are using. I've mentioned Google Analytics and the chatbot before. We also have Google Search Web Console that is managing the SEOs. So that's managing clicks from Google. When people Google City of Eureka, pay water bill, you want to make sure the first thing that comes up is the actual page to pay your water bill rather than, 3 pages deep on Google or the third result. We want it to always be first. So that's the first tool there. And then feedback forms are available through the website. Anybody now can scroll to the very bottom of the website and click website feedback or report a broken link, and we'll get information from anybody who's using the website on anything that they might want to tell us. Some of the upcoming projects associated with the website is the city intranet. This is going to be an internal network for city employees. I'm hoping it will continue to foster that sense of unity among the city departments and increase that feeling of being part of sort of a greater vision and values. But it'll be used for different tools like NeoGov, timekeeping, a variety of things that we can possibly share and expand on. Questsys, Laserfish. Oop, I don't think Questsys is here anymore. I think we switched to Laserfish, but that city intranet is one of the next big projects I'm hoping to complete by August. The next thing is there's a lot of PDFs that are hosting information on the website. They're either a form that people have to print out and then bring in, or email. It's kind of like a clunky way to do form filling. So we really want to switch all of that over to fillable forms on the website. You click this thing, you fill it out, it sends to the person it needs to send to. And then there's also a lot of PDFs that host content or information that really should be in the website as prose, expository writing, or it needs to get nixed. So that's a project moving forward. Otherwise, we're going to continue to improve the user experience by utilizing those analysis tools and public feedback, and just sort of kind of fine-tuning that process. And that leads into content and organization improvement. It's not perfect right now, so we are just going to continue to try to perfect the way that information is organized and presented on the website. Otherwise, training and legacy, we want to make sure that people in the city, employees, have the knowledge and the skill to do all this stuff. So we want to keep increasing that knowledge and skill. We want to have regular trainings. We want to have people dedicated to this so that we can continue to grow and maintain the city's presence online, because the internet is, as far as I know, not yet going away. At the end of the day, we're really trying to build community. Like, that's the ultimate goal. So to that end, we really want to increase the access to information and resources. We don't just want a feeling of unity within the city employees. We want that unity within the greater Eureka community. We want to feel like there's a partnership going on between the city and government employees, and part of bridging that gap is going to be the digital presence, because most people are online. So this is a wonderful opportunity to improve that sort of civic engagement. And yeah, it's all thanks to you guys. If you have any questions, if you want to talk about the websites, or contact me specifically about it, there is the email and my phone number.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Moulton.
Jumping right in there.
Please do.
First, thank you so much for the presentation, and of course for all of the work that you have done. I understand how huge of a job that is, and just poking around, it's already just a massive, obviously a massive improvement. I just wanted to point out, I noticed a couple things that had come up in strategic visioning, like the content, the topic specific, notify me for folks, the increase of accessibility for community engagement. And I just love seeing that come from like the stickies we were putting on the wall all the way through.
Oh, cool.
Like something coming out in the world that the citizens can actually engage with. Thank you. I'm really happy to see such a strong use of analytics. Boy, I love data.
Me too.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And then I have two actual questions here. One of the things that was an issue on the old website for me, I'm curious if you have a strategy to address it, is perishability of information. So if somebody puts up something and that information is going to not be any good in a few months, is it going to go away automatically? Or am I going to keep getting search results that are only relevant 3 years ago?
That is a great question. Two-pronged answer here. Depending on the item, if it's a news item, we can set it to expire. If it's website content that is embedded into a page, the expiration of that is going to depend entirely on the people who are tasked with maintaining and updating that. And as I mentioned, one of the biggest problems we've faced here has been the kind of dispersal of responsibility over ownership of website content. And the people in charge of it are generally departmental admins, who this is like kind of an additional task they've been asked to cover. Yeah. So that is moving forward. We're hoping to see increased training for website administrators, maybe make space for people whose main job is to do that kind of thing. But it really kind of depends on growing the web presence, and what that looks like in the future is not really for me to comment on.
I can comment on it though.
Go for
it. Perhaps a review, like a departmental review of content on a timeline, on a specific timeline. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that Cozy's exactly right. This is not. It's kind of an other duty as assigned for some of our admin folks. Some of them have more reason because of the programming. So let's say community services, they do stuff and they're rotating stuff all the time, whereas maybe public works doesn't have such a turnover. And so you may have stuff last there longer. Definitely because of the training and the great work that these guys have done with that training, we're hoping that will address some of those issues. But in the long run, we'd really like to have a more dedicated staff person to kind of oversee the whole thing. And so that's something down the road that we'd like to look into and make sure that that's a part of, at least a proposal to council to think about in the future. But until then, it's going to need to be based on them following up. I think that the analytics that are in the website and people being able to make comments and saying that this is old, get rid of it, would be great. So I would encourage people when it is old for them to make those comments, and then hopefully that'll trigger them to make the changes.
And then also, you said there's a mechanism for like blog post style or news style, something that has an expiration date on it, and that's available to people to use.
It's available internally. So if
Right,
I
of
create
course,
a news
internal.
item, if I create a news item, I can set it to expire at a certain time. And most people who are making things that is like transient in nature are going to set an expiration date on it. That's
Lovely.
part of the training. Yeah.
I have one more question / suggestion. So often we get these really great presentations here at the meeting that come in the form of a slide deck, which can easily be turned into a PDF or a slideshow. And I often think that those should end up somewhere on the website or on social media, but often they end up right here and they stop, and I'll take it, put it on my Facebook page, and let people see that. But I'd love to see some way to get that, already prepared, already polished information going out through the city channels, whether it's on the website or on social media or some combination of connections like you're talking about.
That's fantastic. I love that idea.
Throwing that out there.
I would like to find a way to facilitate receiving those types of content, because like you said, it kind of stops here. So I'm not sure how I would solicit, for example, if I wanted to get Eddie Alexander's slides, I would have to be here and know that they were doing it. Or we would have some, I don't know, I'm kind of just thinking on my feet, but if there was a way to aggregate it and get it to me or somebody who manages website administration, we could definitely create a space for that on the website. That would be cool.
And I'm no expert in this, and I'm sure Assistant City Manager Powell may chime in, but I believe Granicus, when we have the agenda posted on Granicus, you can hit the link for the video and it'll go to that presentation.
Sure, but when, Parks and Rec says, here's what's happening at 2030, and they have a 10-slide deck, and it's beautiful, and it's very clear, and then it's presented in the video, but it's right in the middle of the meeting. Somebody wants to go to Parks and Rec and say, what's happening at 2030, they can get a paragraph of information, or they could get that beautiful, polished presentation with pictures and everything.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. I mean, that link goes to the video. So, I mean, if you put that link in there, the video would be of the presentation by Parks and Rec.
I see, as opposed to, you don't mean the whole council meeting?
No,
They get to,
it would,
scroll
except, and
through.
correct me if I'm wrong, City Manager Powell, is that not how Granicus works? So can't you click on it and then it goes directly to that portion of the video?
You go to the section on the agenda.
We certainly can do it that way, or I can also usually these different slide decks, I have individually, and we can link them more succinct, perhaps, directly to social media, and they wouldn't have to go through Granicus. We can do both ways, but I think that's an excellent idea. Many of these presentations are done so well, and we could do them individually. So, Cozy?
Yeah, y'all think about it.
We'll work together on that.
That sounds great, Pam.
And I have one more thing, which is that it's now after 9:30. Can I please make a motion to extend our meeting before we continue this conversation?
You may.
Till
time certain?
Can we say 10 and then not use all of it?
I'm down with that.
Is that okay? You good with that? Mayor, I'd like to move to extend our meeting till 10 p.m., whether we need it or not.
Second.
Great. So we have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Unanimous yes vote, motion carries.
Thank you.
And that was all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Councilmember Bauer.
Great presentation, Cozy, and great work to everybody on the staff who's contributed to this, because one of the first things I going to the city website, I wanted to watch city council meeting years ago, and I couldn't for the life
Where
of me
is it?
figure how do I figure it out?
Yeah. That was our biggest complaint.
Yeah. And the board of supervisors in our county, I still have a hard time navigating to this day to a video, or watching a live stream. So great job on that. And when you said you didn't have an intranet and you're working on it, I was like, you don't have an intranet? I mean, I work for state agency, and we, for 10 years we've had one. And so I'm glad that's happening.
We have a folder file system. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need an intranet.
It's time. And so, but great job. And it's exciting to see. So thanks for all your hard work.
Yeah, I really got a shout out to a lot of the website admins. The amount of page building they did is just huge. The department admins.
Great. Any other comments? Councilmember Fernandez?
I think you've done a superb job with this, and I really commend you for taking us out of the doldrums of 2005 in the way that our website looked. I know it's not that long ago, but it's really easy to navigate. And yeah, even when I first tried using it, it was difficult to try and just get around, but you've really simplified it, and I think you've done a superb job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councilmember Contreras-Deloach.
Well, I thought you did really well tonight, for one thing. I know you said you were nervous, but I thought you did really well. This was a great presentation as well. But yeah, the website, just to add my voice to everybody else's, it's so much better. It's just orders of magnitude so much better. So thank you for that to everybody.
Councilmember Castellano.
I'll just echo my thanks. And I appreciate the community-centric thinking that you put into it, because that's really, I think, what we want it to be, as a source for people to connect and engage and have a positive experience of civic engagement rather than a frustrating one.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people, use the website to access form, so I think that'll be a great kind of further build out, is that people can actually fill out those forms online and not have to, in terms of, people who use the city for planning or for, submitting plans to the building department and things like that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Speaking mainly for myself, but just for the dispersal of workload in this, I don't know that it would have gone quite as well if it hadn't been sort of a passion project to fix something that was driving so many people crazy, so it really was thank you so much, everybody, for your nice words, because it was definitely, it was from the heart.
Great. Well, thank you to both of you. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I haven't heard one complaint.
I really have to thank Suzanne for the colors. She helped me make it colorful. Oh, yeah, sorry, Eddie Alexander. You guys actually supplied the hashtags or hacks codes. We just put them in there.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. So our final bit of city business is council reports and city-related travel reports, and we shall go back and forth. We'll start with Councilmember Contreras-Deloach.
I was expecting me to be last.
Yeah.
Sorry. Council reports. So I will try to do this quickly because I know let me pull this up really quick. I had a note because there was just so much that we ended up doing this last little bit of time. So I got to do a water and wastewater tour with Director Gerving. And we had Abe Crow and Michael Hansen. Is that right? Hansen? All right. who were so enthusiastic about what they do. And it was an incredible tour. I was really just blown away by what they're doing. And I said to Director Gerving that I was glad that they are all doing what they're doing, so I don't have to think about it. I can just turn on my faucet and flush the toilet and not worry, because we have good people making sure that all that's being worried about. And I was so impressed with our water and wastewater treatment facilities. I know a little bit about that kind of stuff. And so it was just really cool to kind of see it. So we have like a really great system here. And I may or may not have panicked slightly when we went into the one very large holding thing. And I may or may not have pushed Director Gerving in front of me. If anybody's familiar with Stranger Things, it looked like I had gone into the Upside Down and I just panicked. It's very still, very quiet, very dark with like red, a little bit light coming through. And apparently it's like 26 feet deep, but you can't tell because the water's perfectly still. Total panic mode. Anyway, but very interesting, great learning experience. Super appreciated it. And same thing. So let me look at this really quick. Okay. I got to meet with REDEC and have a scheduling conflict. So I talked with you guys about that. I got to briefly attend a Zoom event with Senator Alex Padilla, just kind of listening on how they're planning on doing stuff with winter storm recovery, which a lot doesn't even apply to us. I got to do a tour with our Chief Sean Robertson, our fire chief. And so I went and saw everything. That was yesterday. It went a little bit longer, so then I ended up missing another meeting. But I just got to see all the different firehouses. And again, it's one of those careers where you're just so supremely grateful for people who are doing things that you can't do, wouldn't do, terrified to do. Just blown away by the men and women over there that are doing that. And so grateful because they're the ones that get those first calls. In fact, I got to see one of the people who I tripped over a baby gate backwards about a year and a half ago and broke my back. And I was like, hey, I recognize you. You're one of the people that hauled me out of my kitchen. So anyway, just good people over there. We attended the Cal Cities Conference and training in Universal City, Kim and Mario as well, or Mayor Burgell and Councilmember Fernandez as well. That was really important. That's all of our kind of like training on what not to do. So California has really strict rules, which is great because it's trying to make sure that none of us are doing anything untoward. So they just going over so much training to make sure you don't say or do the wrong thing and that you don't have, little cahoots meetings. So it was really good. I got to meet with our Redwood Regional Director, Sarah Sanders, and also with Ali Sajid Taj, who's the president of Cal Cities. Got to visit with him a little bit too and talk with him about them pursuing another caucus. They have a few caucuses already, and those are dedicated specifically to different marginalized groups. And there's a couple that are would be good for them to kind of get that. So that was the other thing. And I feel like there's something and today I went to, so we had California's Secretary of Treasury, Fiona Ma, that had come today. And our economic development had put that on, and it was really nice. We didn't have like a big group. What do you think? Like maybe 25 or 30 people? Yeah, because Miles was there too. But I thought it was really good, and we got to kind of hear what some of the different concerns that different people had. So we heard people talk about cannabis, housing issues. I'm trying to think of some of the other stuff that came up, like funding of different kinds of like special funding groups, how to kind of pursue alternative dwelling units and how to maybe like. So there was a lot of good conversations that went back and forth, and I feel like they were just really receptive to like how to like help our area, which has some unique challenges, and that's all my stuff.
Thank you. Councilmember Castellano. We're mixing it up.
Let's see. Well, for part of the last period, I was out of town on vacation, but still attending meetings while away, but not quite as many. But I did go to attend the Cal Cities Housing Community and Economic Development Policy Committee meeting, of which it's always very interesting to kind of hear different perspectives on housing. And I really appreciate that in the city of Eureka, we're definitely forward thinking with housing. Continuing to meet with the Cultural Arts District Working Group, and I attended the Eureka Main Street meeting, where I gave a brief presentation on an overview of community ambassador types of programs. And I'm continuing to host a weekly housing meeting and co-hosted a housing mixer, and attended, I think all of us attended the chamber dinner. Attended the chamber dinner as well.
Councilmember Bauer.
Yeah, it was a lot of meetings this past few weeks. It seems like I attended Cal City's Environmental Policy Committee, Governance, Transparency, Labor Relations Committee. We're looking at bills that are coming through the Assembly and Senate. Lots of stuff going on at the state level. I attended the Redwood Coast Energy Authority meeting. Chamber mixer was a lot of fun, seeing everybody there. And every student succeeding breakfast, which happened, a couple weeks ago?
Mm-hmm.
That was great.
Mm-hmm.
That was like a highlight for me. It was just so fun to see students and succeeding. So it was great. And I want to say March 4th, we're going to have a Cooper Gulch workday. So please come out. We're going to do invasive species removal, a little trail maintenance from 9:30 to 12. So hope people can make it. That's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Fernandez. I am. Just for fun.
Yeah, right. Much like Councilmember Deloche and Mayor Burgell here, I attended the League of Cities new mayor, new council member, what would you call that, training conference, and felt a little rudimentary for me at the start. That's not saying anything bad about it. A lot of people needed it. But as soon as we started touching on our responsibilities in terms of land use, as well as our fiscal obligations, it started clicking a bit more on what we need to do and what we've done. Seems like everybody else has been quite busy with a lot of the committees that they have or tours of the facilities, which I've been trying to get to work with my schedule. At least I get to go on a tour of the parks tomorrow. So I finally get to do that. So I do need to reschedule a few things so I can do some of the similar touring of the facilities that you've done, like yourself, Councilmember Deloche, and then wait for some of my committees to start up, particularly next month. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Moulton.
I'm the only one left, Mayor. Thank you. Let's see, I don't have any travel to report, but on Thursday the 26th, I got to attend a little community meeting hosted by Commander Hill from the EPD, just connecting the different services, the emergency services, with folks, leaders there in the Second Ward, including Ty from the Housing Authority, some folks from the Neighborhood Watch, some representatives from Humboldt Bay Fire, of course, Commander Hill from EPD. They had the dispatcher come in and talk about how many 911 calls they feed, and it was just and it was just a really great little round table with folks in the neighborhood talking about what's going on, what is available, how the challenges that we're facing, things that have improved, ways to improve things and engage even more. And so I want to thank Commander Hill and the folks from Humboldt Bay Fire and Dispatch from coming out to talk to the folks in the neighborhood about that. Everybody got a lot out of it, I think. I attended the Chamber Awards, which is encouraging to see such a vivacious and active business community as we have. Incidentally, not as part of the chamber or as my council service, I have opened a business in Old Town, which I won't mention the name of, but just to say that I'm looking forward to gaining that perspective and being a part of that community of entrepreneurs that are really making Old Town just more and better. Yeah, it's good. And Arts Alive is super fun. And I'm looking forward to my Humboldt Bay Fire tour tomorrow, because when I did it the first time, it happened on January 6th, 2020. We were in a pandemic and couldn't go inside any of the buildings. So I spent my whole day driving around listening to riots at the Capitol, which was a little bit distracting. So I'm looking forward to doing that one as well, hopefully tomorrow. And that's all I have to report. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. So one thing I was remiss in mentioning is that we are still looking for people for our different commissions. So it's an opportunity to get involved in our community. And, I just encourage you guys to step up. It's a lot of fun. We get to know people that way. And, there's a pride and ownership. So with that, thanks everybody for sticking around. We appreciate you and happy Tuesday. We're done.